Godmorgen. Godmorgen. Hur mår du? Jag hoppas att alla är bra och fresh idag. Eh, jag heter Johannes von Hulsen och jag är VD och CEO för EV Europeiska till Sverige och Danmark. Så varmt välkommen till EV's Travel Business Compliance Day. We will switch into English now. That's good. But we also have some guests from some countries outside of Sweden, and also the topic is quite international, so we said that we keep some of the speeches, not all, but some in Swedish, and not all, but some in English. So, let me just get a little bit the warm-up, so why we're here and what we're doing today. I think we all think it's an interesting topic, and let's get a little bit into that. I don't know exactly if you're aware that ERV or Europeiska has kind of been always the leader in travel insurance in Sweden for many years, and we still consider us as the market leader in this very specific niche. And I think it's fair to say that as a market leader, you have some, well, I don't want to overjudge it, but you have some responsibilities in a way. And I think one of these things is that we like to be ahead of things, that we like to be, so to say, have the sense to the nerves of the challenges of the market, that we in a way see our duty to really go as a specialist out there and see what's cooking, and that we bring some of this back to the market. I think that's a traditional theme of a market leader. And we take that very serious. And therefore, we believe that this is a very important topic to talk about, business compliance. If we talk about business compliance, it's very important to bear one thing in mind, and that is that there are no gray zones anymore with this topic. I think that's extremely important, as you can see, that this topic has been suffering a little bit from, well, maybe we can be compliant. Or this kind of game, don't know exactly, is it or isn't it? That doesn't work either. Or is it maybe rather, I don't want to know really about if we are completely compliant in this area? That also is extremely difficult, and it has become very difficult in the last 2 years and 3 years. So what has been kind of an okay thing, maybe in the last couple of years, is not anymore. So the problem with these gray zones, if you go out of Sweden into the international market and you kind of shrug your shoulders and you say, it's okay, let's not really want to know. We don't really want to find out if that's the case. That just, in our view, doesn't work anymore. And in the last 2 years in the renewals, we have seen a lot of speeches, and we have been talking with customers, we have been talking with other brokers, we have been even had some contacts with competitors. And honestly speaking, we have been extremely worried about that the awareness is still so low about this topic. And having said that, we believe, let's go out in the market and let's talk about this topic. That's much better than just to keep this to us. As a market leader, we should go out to the market and we should talk about this topic. So please, this is not an ERV topic. This is not our exclusive little thing we would like to talk about. This is a market topic. And this is a market conference. That is very important. So therefore, a warm, warm welcome to all of you for today. A warm welcome to our competitors that are also with us today, and some of them will also be in the live stream. Welcome. And also to the video cut, which we will do later. Welcome to the colleagues and friends from the brokerage side. That's great that you're here. And I think it's important, and we feel appreciated that you also take this topic serious. Welcome to some colleagues from press, and of course also from our teams in Sweden, and of course also from Denmark. And also to our colleagues in Munich Re Group, which we also like to address because we work closely together with them in our solutions. And you know, Munich Re is a global player, and we are really proud and happy that we are part of a global player because this is a global topic. So, warm welcome, and of course, welcome to our speakers today. We have Håkan Nyholm from SEB Life. Welcome. And we have Carol Au-Yong and Ali Mufti from Axco in London. And we have Andreas Löderfink and his colleague Hartmut Hessebart from Sherman Sterling in Frankfurt. So, warm welcome. Thanks for being here. So, what is this thing about business compliance? The solution to the problem out there in the market. And let me give me, let's say, about 5 to 7 minutes. I hope I make it. And then we can go into the presentations, of course. But let me little bit warm up the topic. What is actually business compliance? What are we talking about? Very shortly, what is the difference between business compliance and general compliance? Håkan will talk a little bit more about this in a minute, so I don't want to say too much, but in our world, at least 2 things should be mentioned. We consider general compliance as being relevant for the company level, företagsnivå. And it is more of a framework. And we have there external and internal effects. And there you have a lot of things you have heard before, of course. For instance, like money laundering, fraud control, things like when you are to say embargo issues and so forth. Plus, of course, know your risk. But Håkan will talk about this in a minute much more. And then we consider another, so to say, important area of compliance, what we call business compliance. And business compliance is not on company level, but it's on product level. So it's on another level. And it's not necessarily a framework, but it's an enablement. So it is an enablement for having a proper product in place. And we consider 3 subcomponents being relevant for business compliance. That is regulatory compliance, meaning having the right licenses in place, having the right representation in the local markets in place. And we will learn later from Axco and also from Sherman Sterling much more what does that mean and how complex that is. That's by far not easy at all, because we are outside of Sweden, as we have shown before. And we're not operating in Sweden anymore in this respect. The second pillar to this is tax compliance, paying the right taxes to the right people in the right place. That's all but easy. That's quite demanding. And consumer protection, of course, also is quite relevant, again, on product level. So that's what we call business compliance if we compare it with general compliance. And we talk about these 2, so to say, topics. I hope that you understand. And we would like to flash some light at the beginning on general compliance. And later we move a little bit more and we zoom, so to say, into the business compliance. So I hope that you kind of see the difference also during the rest of the day. Nya gränsen, new frontiers. Why? Well, we see this in 3 different categories or in 3 dimensions. We see new frontiers in regulatory perspective, in the view and perspective of the buyer of insurance. Some of you are here today. And some of you are brokers that support that. And some of you are competitors that, of course, also try to get in that market. And, of course, indeed, the insurance companies in itself. So if we structure these, so to say, challenges very briefly, we can see it in the way that some challenges have changed now in the last 2 to 3 years, and you should, and we should all be aware of that. In the meantime, non-compliant is not anymore accepted as this, it's okay thing, don't worry, it's fine. You know, it's like parking your car in front of the pharmacy, running inside, leaving the children in the car, locking the car, going in there, it will be okay. This approach was more or less the approach for our business for decades. It doesn't work anymore. We have seen now millions of SEC fines being imposed on insurance companies that are not compliant. Next one. We have certainly rulings from EU Court of Justice, Domstolen, in the EU context, where it is very clear that it is not only anymore the insurance company that is, so to say, under obligation to ensure proper insurance. Brokers and insurance buyers, as much as the insurers, have the same duty. So we are all in the same boat. Looking for another insurer doesn't help anyone because the next insurer has the same problem. And you as buyer have also this challenge. So this is certainly the case, and also the brokerage world is aware of best advice. Brokers need to give proper advice, and therefore, of course, the awareness must be very high. And also, we have, of course, Solvency II, a new frontier. I think Håkan will also talk a bit about that, that we certainly have a complete new transparency on risk and on rules that is live in 2016. That is not very far away. We know that Solvency II is coming now, you know that. It was, of course, always discussed for years. Maybe some hoped it will never come. I think we all did a bit. But it's there now. You heard that in the summer. It's coming. No way out. It's there. And then, of course, lots of rules will change with that for insurance companies. Financial crisis one. There is global regulatory action. We have been talking to regulators behind the scenes, and it's clear that there are a lot of contacts on the regulatory level. We don't even know that. But it is clearly the case that regulators worldwide are moving together to join their forces and to make sure that, again, a financial crisis of the one that barely left the world more or less shaken will not happen again. And that means that European and American, so to say, developed countries' regulators are talking intensively with regulators in, let's say, BRIC or in borderline countries. And of course, the level will not come down, it will go up. And that's, of course, the consequence of that. And financial crisis too. And then we're done with that part. Money. Public budgets are lacking money. Insurance tax is one of the, I would call it a little bit, forgotten tax. It's the forgotten tax, the one that have been people, or so to say, governments have been a little bit superficial about. That's not the case anymore. There is clearly the drive that this is fairly easy to impose, and it has a fairly high leverage. So there are now a lot of tax activities, and we see that, by the way, also day by day, by tax regulators that become increasingly aware of this topic, and this is certainly, so to say, the trend. So, in other words, that is the regulatory view of these three things as fast trends. And then let's briefly look at the companies as a buyer. Swedish companies will and are already global. Sweden is a highly export-oriented country, you know that. And it will stay. Home market, well, quite developed. Europe or Scandinavia, quite developed. Europe, quite developed. So what are Swedish companies supposed to do if they want to grow? They need to go global. And that has been the trend in the last 20 years, and it will continue to be the next 20 years as well. So this trend will not stop. So us as providers of compliance, or of, I would rather say travel insurance, we need to follow the fortune. Follow the fortune. That means customers go global, we need to go global. Next one, I think also a very important feature. There is an ongoing fight for talent because these companies that are operating in a global scope need people that are ready to travel, speak languages, are versatile. There are not so many of those. So you better keep your most important resource very good. And that's your human capital. These top people that do this globalization for Swedish companies are probably the most important asset of Swedish companies. So Swedish companies do the right thing. They better treat these assets as they should be treated. Very, very good. And that means more service, better covers, and of course they want to be protected. And that means they need to be in a compliant environment. So that is certainly a trend that will not stop. It just will become even more complex. And that's now the last dimension, and that is now for us as companies, and also to, of course, brokerage and the way that good business compliance is very, very complex. If you want to be regulatory tax and consumer protection compliance, you have hundreds of rules in different countries to obey. These change all the time, and it is extremely demanding to keep track of that. We will hear about that later. So that is a challenge. And last but not least, it's about money. It's extremely expensive. Why? Because for that you need, of course, a good coverage. You need interdisciplinary teams of lawyers, of tax people, of business people, of product people, as we have put in place. We will talk maybe a bit later about that. That can provide such a facility. And you must, of course, be aware of the fact that this price or the money or the cost for that has not yet been factored in the price. So at the moment, we see that the price for corporate travel insurance is not or only partially factoring in these effects. So we are missing a factor price. And it is also very clear that the claims ratios are rising constantly. Constantly. And why is that so? Because we are exposed to health insurance to a large degree, and health insurance follows medical inflation, and medical inflation is not normal inflation. If we yield normal inflation in Sweden and Denmark of 1 to 3% on average over the last, let's say, 25 years, medical inflation yields between 8 to 10 to 12%. So the market is permanently underpricing. Permanently underpricing. And if we are now putting even this on top, because I understand we all want to be compliant, we talk money. And that's, of course, now a question we should discuss. So all in all, to come to an end, this for the companies, that for the buyers, and the other page for the regulators, that is, we think, a new world. Most of these, or lots of these things have evolved in the last 2 to 3 years, very heavily. And as I said before, this is a market conference, so we would like to make the Swedish market aware of this issue. And this is certainly something we need to talk about. So the question now is, and that's for today, let's discuss with you about these topics. What is actually business compliance, as I said, in detail? Let's find out a little bit more about what is proper business compliance. What does that entail? And what are the, so to say, isn't this one of the most relevant questions for the Swedish corporate travel insurance market in the next 3 to 5 years? Isn't that the topic for the next 3 to 5 years we should discuss in this specialized part of the insurance market in Sweden? And, of course, are we ready for it? Are we really ready for these challenges? And we will talk about the challenges later today. And finally, what does that mean for those that are in the market? For the insurers, for the brokers, for those companies that buy the insurance, and last but not least, for the ones that are protected. Or maybe they're not protected? That's the question. So, that's my little, so to say, intro. I'm glad that we have a chance to talk to you. We really believe it's an important topic, and as I said, we would like to just raise awareness at the start. That's what it is all about. So, what is our plan for today? We have 3 speakers, and I would like to start with Håkan. So, warm welcome.
Ja, jag ska få säga först att det är väldigt skojigt att komma hit. Och mitt namn är alltså Håkan Nyholm och jag har jobbat med compliance i SEB Life i ungefär 5 år. Just det, jag ska backa lite här. Jag ska säga det jag kommer att hålla mitt anförande kring, det kommer nog vara mer i det som Johannes talar om, general compliance. Ärligt talat, när jag blev kontaktad inför det här evenemanget så hade inte jag en aning om vad business compliance var för något. Jag var tvungen att fråga Johannes. Men när jag fick förklaringen så insåg jag att det är någonting som vi också ställs inför. Så att säga, men vi använder inte det riktigt i ordet inom SEB. Så jag ville bara säga det. Sen det som jag kommer att prata om kommer nog ändå huvudsakligen vara inriktat på general compliance, men jag kommer också komma in på business compliance. Men jag kommer hålla mig på en lite mer allmän nivå, men förhoppningsvis ska det kunna fungera som en bakgrund och en plattform för de mer business compliance-inriktade anförandena som kommer komma lite senare. Hur som helst, jag hade tänkt i stora drag lägga upp mitt föredrag ungefär så här, att jag tänkte tala om så att säga de organisatoriska och teoretiska ramarna för compliance i SEB. Och särskilt då SEBs försäkringsverksamhet. Sen kommer jag bli ganska subjektiv och berätta en del om hur har det varit att jobba som compliance, hur ser nuläget ut, vad är utmaningarna. Sen kommer det skönaste avsnittet kommer här på slutet, jag får reflektera över hur ska compliance jobba, hur ser framtiden ut, jag får vara lite spekulativ sådär. Det tycker jag är kul. Men jag ska försöka hålla 45 minuter, men jag lovar ingenting. Men hur som helst, när det gäller den organisatoriska ramen så att säga, så ett utsnitt ur SEB-koncernen och försäkringskoncernen i synnerhet, den ser ut så här. Alltså SEB-koncernen är en rätt stor koncern. Det finns någonting på uppåt ett par hundra företag i den här koncernen. Men i toppen på koncernen har vi Skandinaviska Enskilda Banken AB. Under det bolaget finns ett holdingbolag. Under holdingbolaget så finns det ungefär 7 försäkringsbolag. Vi har gamla Livförsäkringsaktiebolaget. Det är ett traditionellt livförsäkringsbolag som är i run-off. Men är ganska stort, 160 miljarder ungefär i omslutning, 500 000 kunder. Så det kommer leva vidare ganska länge till 2066 ungefär. Men då, sen så har vi Fondförsäkringsaktiebolaget SEB Tryggliv där man bedriver aktiv försäkringsverksamhet, huvudsakligen inriktad på fondförsäkring. Det är stort på vår marknad här i Sverige. En balansomslutning på ungefär 200 miljarder. Sen har vi ett exotiskt försäkringsbolag i Ukraina. Det håller vi på att försöka göra oss av med. Men sen har vi ett irländskt bolag. Jag kommer återkomma till det lite senare i min presentation. För där är den här frågan om business compliance väldigt stor. Sen har vi ett SEB Pension i Danmark. Det är huvudsakligen ett traditionellt ganska stort livbolag där, ungefär 90 miljarder i omslutning. Väldigt stort i Danmark. Sen har vi 3 försäkringsbolag i de baltiska länderna. Jag ska säga också min roll som compliance, alltså bara så att ni har lite koll. Alltså jag är anställd i SEB i banken. Men jag är så att säga uthyrd eller outsourcad från försäkringsbolagens synvinkel, så är jag compliance-chef i det gamla livförsäkringsaktiebolaget SEB Tryggliv och i fondförsäkringsaktiebolaget. Sen är jag dessutom compliance-chef för hela koncernen, men jag har där, om man ser på koncernen, så har jag ett funktionellt och samordnande ansvar. I de här utländska försäkringsbolagen så finns det compliance-chefer antingen anställda i bolagen eller också köper man tjänsterna från bankerna i samma länder. Men så ser det ut organisatoriskt, och så ser min roll ut i den här verksamheten. Den här förvirrade bilden ska ju bara ge en bild av hur, jag ska inte alls gå in i detalj, men vi har en stor koncern, en centraliserad compliance-funktion som är centraliserad i SEB-koncernen. Och vi har alltså en chef för compliance-verksamheten, Head of Group Compliance. Sen har vi olika funktioner inom den här compliance-organisationen. Jag ska inte gå in så mycket på det, men en viktig komponent i den här organisatoriska formen, det är att vi har sen uppdelat under chefen för compliance har man compliance-chefer för respektive affärsområde eller division. Och där kan ni se, där kommer livsidan in. Sen har vi då, som jag antydde tidigare, vi har då compliance-chefer i de olika länderna. Hela compliance-organisationen inom SEB-koncernen, den inrymmer ungefär 70 compliance officers. Knappt hälften jobbar här i landet, resten jobbar utomlands och är lokalt förankrade. Så ser det ut. Sen som om man ska titta väldigt kort och övergripande på förhållande till andra funktioner, så brukar man tala om, det känner ni som jobbar med compliance här, det kanske inte alla av er, men man talar om första försvarslinjen, andra försvarslinjen och tredje försvarslinjen. Det är någonting som vi har anammat inom SEB-koncernen. Så att den första försvarslinjen, riskägarna, då, de som ska ytterst ansvara för regelefterlevnad, det är själva affären, så att säga. Sen kommer kontrollfunktionerna och där talar man först om den andra försvarslinjen och där talar vi om riskkontrollfunktionen. Då. De tittar på finansiella risker, operationella risker, försäkringsrisker och så. Men sen tittar man på regelefterlevnad och där får vi compliance. Och man ser alltså compliance ur någon sorts strukturell synpunkt som en kontrollerande funktion. Så vi ska se till att affären sköter sig. Sen har vi intern revision som står över allt annat. Sen har vi extern revision också, men det kan vi glömma nu. Jag blir alldeles utmattad. Men intern revision ska inte bara titta på affären, utan de ska ju även se att riskkontroll och compliance-funktionerna sköter sig. Det här är det konceptuella uppbyggnaden. Jag ska säga det också att inom SEB-koncernen så compliance-organisationen där är relativt ny. I ledningen på SEB för knappt 10 år sedan så kom man till insikt om att den regelutveckling som man såg både hemma och internationellt gjorde att man måste ha en organisation för att kunna ta hand om det här. Så att 2007 så drev man ett ganska stort projekt inom hela SEB-koncernen där man som syftade till att bygga upp en compliance-organisation. Och den sjösattes sedan 2008. Så den här compliance-organisationen som jag har beskrivit nu, den har då ungefär 7 år på nacken, ungefär blir det väl 6. Så. Och när man tittar på compliance ansvarsområden, och här är det ju general compliance som vi är inne på, alltså så delar vi in det inom SEB-koncernen. Det kanske inte alltid är så funktionellt, men det här är det, så att säga, de utgångspunkter vi har. Vi har rörelseregler och tillståndsfrågor och där i det inryms då företagsstyrning och intern kontroll, det vill säga governance-frågor. Och där har vi Solvens 2-regelverket hör ju hemma där. Och outsourcing och jobb med interna instruktioner och allt möjligt. Även funktionen som kontaktperson mot Finansinspektionen går in under den här hatten. Sen har vi konsumentskyddsfrågor. Det handlar om rådgivningslagstiftning, försäljning, kundklagomål, sekretessfrågor framförallt. Jag har bara snittat ut kanske de viktigaste punkterna. Det är mycket annat som ryms inom de här rubrikerna. Sen har vi det som vi kallar marknadsuppförande. Där kommer vi in som frågor om etikfrågor, intressekonflikter, gåvor och representation och sådana saker. Sen antipenningtvätt och terroristfinansiering är en stor sak för livbolag. Jag föreställer mig att det kan inte vara alls en lika stor fråga. Så det har vi som en särskild låda faktiskt. Jag återkommer lite till det. Det kan tyckas lite udda att man är så inriktad på det på försäkringsområdet. Men så ser det ut. Det är en stor issue för oss. De arbetsmetoder och verktyg som vi har att jobba med, alltså det som jag skulle vilja säga de 3 stora områdena, det är rådgivning för det första, internt, kontroll och uppföljning, det är det andra, och sen rapportering. Det är de här 3 huvudkomponenterna. Sen har vi också i verktygslådan, vi ska göra årliga riskanalyser så att vi jobbar riskbaserat. Vi jobbar mot det som vi upplever som de stora riskerna. Vi följer naturligtvis regelutvecklingen och vi ska utveckla och underhålla våra interna regler och instruktioner och sådär. Utbildning och information också, det har tilltagit under de senare åren. Jag ska säga det också, när det gäller rådgivning kontra kontroll och uppföljning så var det en kontroversiell fråga när i SCBs projekt när man startade upp vår compliance-organisation. Det var många som hävdade att det bara skulle vara kontroll och uppföljning, men det man kom fram till det var att rådgivningen skulle vara i högsätet. Men det var en ganska kontroversiell fråga och det finns olika, om man tittar ut i världen så är kulturerna olika faktiskt. Om man tittar på den anglosaxiska världen, särskilt USA, så vill jag nog hävda att kontrollen är nummer 1. Rådgivning kanske knappt finns. I alla fall på vissa områden. Det är vad vi ser. Så det är olika kulturer kring detta. Jag återkommer också till det här, för det innebär en viss konflikt i vårt dagliga arbete. Så här ser, om man säger så, den organisatoriska och teoretiska ramen ut så att säga, för compliance-verksamhet. Jag tänkte nu gå över lite grann och berätta mer om hur jag har upplevt verkligheten och hur jag upplever verkligheten med jobbet som compliance. Jag började alltså hösten 2008 som compliance-chef. Och det som då präglade så att säga min vardag när jag steg in i försäkringskoncernen, det var framförallt att 2008 så hade de båda försäkringsbolagen här i Sverige, Gamla Liv och Fondförsäkringsaktiebolaget, de hade fått varsin sanktion. Det var en riktig stjärnsmäll från inspektionen. Så att man fick, vardera bolaget fick en varning och sen en straffavgift på 15 miljoner för att man hade en otillräcklig intern styrning och kontroll. Och en av de sakerna som inspektionen sköt in sig på, det var att man hade en compliance-funktion som bara fanns på pappret. Och riskkontrollfunktionen var ungefär samma läge. Och det här det var ungefär 3-4 månader innan jag kom in som den här sanktionen hade kommit. Jag skulle nog vilja påstå att båda bolagen befann sig fortfarande i något slags chocktillstånd. Det här underlättade naturligtvis min start. Man hade inget att be för. Man var tvungen att ha en synlig compliance-funktion. Det andra var att finanskrisen hade ju slagit till då 2008. Så de här 2 sakerna sammantaget, så man kan säga att det var dålig stämning i försäkringsbolagen. Det slog ju direkt på värdeutvecklingen och marginaler och sådana saker. I Gamla livbolaget såg det förskräckligt ut. Det var inte så att det var fara för solvensen så att säga, men man hade ju stora marginaler, men alltså, liksom, avkastningen sjönk dramatiskt. Så att säga. Sen ställde sig också för, jag hade hört talas om det här Solvens 2, men det blev en verklighet för mig då när jag steppade in i 2008. Så det här var någonting som dominerade min bild. Själva compliance-arbetet, det är så att säga en sak som definitivt underlättade. Vi hade ju så att säga en ram för verksamheten. Det hade man redan lagt fast, vilka ansvarsområden och vilken arbetsmetodik vi skulle ha. Det förenklade ju för mig. Jag behövde inte fundera så himla mycket, utan jag hade en ganska tydlig ram att gå in i. Vad som gjorde det svårt att jag var i någon mening var en ensamare med. Jag hade inga medarbetare, utan jag jobbade så att säga ensam i Sverige. Å andra sidan hade jag hela den här compliance-organisationen i ryggen och mina kollegor som jag var funktionsansvarig för de utländska bolagen. Mycket handlade om att lära sig att hantera den här verktygslådan, att hitta former för rapportering och sådana saker. Och den här riskanalysen som vi skulle göra, det fick man göra väldigt mycket efter eget huvud så att säga. Så det såg väldigt olika ut och sen så skulle man göra en compliance-plan baseras på den här riskanalysen. Det tyckte jag var jobbigt, för jag skulle sätta igång med det här när jag hade jobbat på plats ett par veckor, och det säger sig självt att det blev som det blev det första året. Någonting annat som påverkade, det var naturligtvis de här sanktionerna. Jag skulle säga hälften av min arbetstid lades ner på att, så att säga, städa upp efter inspektionens sanktioner. Vi var ju punktmarkerade av Finansinspektionen, så de avkrävde oss rapportering, ganska täta rapporter hur det låg till. Och vi hade väldigt svårt att få ordning på vår riskkontrollfunktion av olika skäl. Så det var ganska jobbigt, och inspektionen började skärpa tonen successivt. Frågor kring outsourcing var också någonting som jag ställdes inför ganska snabbt, och det är en stor sak inom SEB-koncernen av naturliga skäl, därför att mycket av verksamheten, särskilt i det gamla försäkringsbolaget och men även i fondförsäkringsaktiebolaget, mycket är så att säga outsourcat till banken, moderbolaget. Och outsourcing, det är ju vissa formkrav numera runt det där, mycket Solvens 2-inspirerat, fast inte det har trätt i kraft ännu. Och det här var ganska svårhanterligt, för banken ser sig ju själv ofta inte som en tjänsteleverantör, utan den som styr koncernen, och det ska dotterbolagen fogas och rätta sig i. Så där har man en ständig konflikt. Det ställdes jag för. Sen var det Solvens 2 naturligtvis. Sen man kan säga att efter 1,5 år så började reaktionen på Finansinspektionens sanktioner. Vi började få ordning på torpet. Vi kunde visa upp att vi hade städat hyggligt, så att vi kunde flytta fokus till andra områden. Men det som så att säga påverkade mig sen framöver i det dagliga arbetet, och vad som fortfarande gäller om man ska ta det väldigt på en övergripande nivå, så kan man säga att dels det som Johannes har varit inne på, alltså regelutvecklingen, den regeltsunami som man brukar kalla det, som vi ställdes inför. Och mycket av den här, alltså man kan säga att regelutvecklingen har ju tilltagit under de senaste 15 åren, men det fick en extra acceleration på grund av finanskrisen. För reglerarnas förhållningssätt från finanskrisen på EU-nivå och i USA är: hur ska man förhindra en upprepning av den här finanskrisen? Jo, genom regleringar. Så utöver att vi hade Solvens 2 att ta hand om, det var ju klart sedan tidigare, så ställdes SEB-koncernen inför en stor regelmängd som kom mycket huvudsakligen på grund av finanskrisen. En hel del av de här reglerna spillde även på försäkringsområdet. Från motsvarande regleringar kom ju också från USA. Jag går inte, det är Dodd-Frank, Act of Volcker Rules och sådana saker. Det träffade huvudsakligen bankverksamheten, men även de på marginalen träffade försäkringsområdet. Jag har tagit upp i USA har jag skrivit FATCA. Jag tror inte ni träffas så mycket av det, men det är det är egentligen en reglering i USA som syftar till att fånga in amerikanska skatteflyktingar. Och den riktar sig mot alla finansiella institut i hela världen. Då kan man fråga sig, hur kan USA reglera finansiella institut utanför USA? Ja, det är en ganska smart upplägg. Det är inte obligatoriskt att ansluta sig till det här FATCA, men gör man det inte kostar det pengar, och då är man ut ur marknaden. Enkelt uttryckt. Det här är det största projektet, skulle jag vilja påstå, efter Solvens 2 för försäkringsbolaget att förhålla sig till det här, och det är jättestort inom SEB-koncernen. Den andra omvärldsfaktorn som naturligtvis påverkade oss, det var ju Finansinspektionens förhållningssätt. Och det här gäller inte bara Finansinspektionen här i Sverige, utan tillsynsmyndigheterna i de andra länderna där SEB-koncernen har dotterbolag eller filialer. Det är ju tillsynsmyndigheternas förhållningssätt. De har ju blivit mycket, mycket tuffare jämfört med hur det var för en 5-10 år sedan. Man kan enkelt uttrycka sig som så att man styr genom sådana sanktioner på ett annat sätt än förut. Förhållningssättet från myndigheterna är mycket, mycket tuffare. Det är en helt annan värld. Man kan inte alls på samma sätt som förut lite informellt ringa upp inspektionen om man tycker man befinner sig i en gråzon och man vill diskutera någonting. Det får man avhålla sig från. Utan man får bedöma situationen på kammaren efter bästa förmåga. Så att det är en mycket tuffare attityd från tillsynsmyndigheterna. Och det skapar ju sig, det är kanske den största risken så att säga. Sen fokusen från inspektionen, det var och är ju intern styrning och kontroll. Det är ofta det de återkommer till i sina sanktioner och det de skriver i sina rapporter, att de är inte nöjda med institutens interna styrning och kontroll. De andra specifika områdena, antipenningtvätt och finansiell rådgivning, det är de 2 stora områdena för inspektionen och även för försäkringsbolaget därmed. Både de här antipenningtvätt och finansiell rådgivning, jag misstänker att det är ni som håller, det här är ett skadeförsäkringsbolag och jag misstänker att det inte är så himla heta grejer för er. För livbolagen är det här glödhett. Det är de stora riskerna. När det gäller då, det här speglade naturligtvis det compliance-arbete som vi håller på med inom på försäkringssidan. Det är Solvens 2 och det är FATCA och sen är det EMIR, det är en särskild reglering från EU rörande derivattransaktioner. Men Solvens 2 och FATCA är de stora områdena om man ska pinpointa. Antipenningtvätt och finansiell rådgivning. Det är de stora riskområdena. SCB är föremål både för inspektioner, både på antipenningtvättsområdet och när det gäller finansiell rådgivning. Jobbigt. Det andra som har påverkat arbetet också, det är att man kan säga att, och jag återkommer också lite till det, det har blivit mer fokus från reglerarna på den kontrollerande verksamheten. Reglerarna vill att compliance ska kontrollera, uppfölja, dokumentera. Så att det är inget som faller så naturligt för mig, men det är den verklighet vi lever i. Jag tycker det är lite besvärligt, men jag gör mitt bästa. Jag återkommer lite grann till det. Jag tänkte sen säga lite grann om SCB-koncernen och business compliance. Här fick jag ju tänka till för att, eftersom vi har rört oss med det här begreppet riktigt. Men när jag funderade så är det här i högsta grad en realitet för SCB-koncernen och den underliggande livkoncernen. Om man tittar på SCB-koncernen generellt, alltså inkluderande SCB, själva banken, moderbolaget, vi har ju etableringar i utlandet och det är egentligen huvudsakligen det sätt som vi jobbar med business compliance. Vi har personer lokalt förankrade, om det är Tyskland eller Singapore, som är tyskar eller de är uppväxta i Singapore, de är utbildade där. Det är så vi hanterar det. Vi verkar inte på så att säga cross-border-basis, det vill säga att verka i ett värdland utan att ha etableringar där, utan vi har etableringar. Det är dotterbolag eller filialer huvudsakligen som vi verkar igenom. Den här regeltsunamin som jag har beskrivit som kom mycket till följd av finanskrisen, den har aktualiserat för SCB-koncernen i stort och det gäller särskilt för förhållandet till USA men även i viss mån gentemot EU. Att det som man ytterst ställs inför, det är om de här regulatoriska kraven och de krav ofta på governance-strukturer och rapporteringar och sådana saker, om de är så tunga som man överhuvudtaget ska fortsätta och göra affärer till exempel mot USA. Och situationen är faktiskt den att vi i några fall har stängt ner affärer därför att de lokala regulatoriska kraven kostar för mycket. De innebär för stora risker. Och det är överväganden som man gör kontinuerligt så att säga. Så att det är en verklighet. Om man tittar på SEB Liv, alltså Livkoncernen, hur hanterar de business compliance specifikt och hur ser verkligheten ut? Och då kan man säga så här, med undantag för vårt irländska bolag så verkar försäkringsbolagen enbart på sina hemmamarknader. Och jag vet att beträffande våra bolag här i Sverige så är det inte någonting som bara har råkat bli, utan det är faktiskt ett aktivt ställningstagande. Kostnaderna och riskerna med att bedriva cross-border-verksamhet ansågs vara alldeles för stora. Det var alldeles för svårt att leva upp till de lokala regleringarna, om det nu är försäkringsrörelseregleringar, skatteregleringar, kundskyddsregler. Så att vi bedriver bara verksamhet här i Sverige. Vi marknadsför oss bara i Sverige. Sen har vi då SEB Life International, vårt irländska bolag. Där är det precis omvänt. Man får inte bedriva försäkringsverksamhet eller rättare sagt sälja försäkringar i Irland. Utan de verkar enbart cross-border till det är 9 länder i Europa. Sverige, Finland, England, Frankrike, Belgien, Italien, Spanien och några till möjligen. Men här är hela idén att man ska så att säga utnyttja den nationella lagstiftningen som man nu verkar i. Men det innebär ju också att business compliance är helt centralt, alltså både för själva affärsmodellen och för compliance-verksamhet. Man har i det här bolaget, SEB Life International, man har ungefär 100 personer anställda. 4 av dem tillhör compliance-organisationen. Det är ganska mycket det. I väldigt runda tal skulle jag vilja påstå att hälften av deras arbetstid går åt till det som vi här kallar business compliance. Det är den stora risken. Det är det de lägger ner mest tid och arbete på. De jobbar inte på det sättet att de själva kanske far runt i de olika länderna och undersöker hur den nationella lagstiftningen ser ut. Det är nämligen en omöjlighet. Men däremot så nagelfar de olika typer av rådgivare som man anlitar och har mallar och standarder för hur de ska arbeta. Så att det här är en väldigt stor fråga från SEB Life International. Och hamnar man snett så får det vådliga konsekvenser. Det vet vi också av erfarenhet från just det bolaget. Risken för misselling är stor. Så är vi framme vid mitt favoritområde, reflektioner och subjektiva funderingar. Liksom så. Men om man, det jag först tänkte bara uppehålla mig lite grann, hur ser det ut i SEB Liv, alltså i de 2 i våra försäkringsbolag här i Sverige som jag har mest erfarenhet av, men även i viss mån de utländska bolagen. Hur ser compliance-kulturen ut? Har det skett någon utveckling under de här åren? Man kan säga så här att när jag började för 5 år sedan så hade jag på ett sätt ett ganska enkelt jobb. Man hade ju inget att be för, man måste ha en compliance på plats. Men jag vill nog påstå att compliance-kulturen var inte särskilt utvecklad. Alltså förståelsen för att det här med regelefterlevnad och att man var medveten om regleringar, att man har en kultur där man tar regleringar på allvar och jobbar med det här, den var ganska låg. Och många i ledande positioner då såg trots allt compliance som någonting som katten hade släpat in. Och här vill jag nog säga att här har det skett en väldig kulturförändring. Det är ett skift. Om man ser över 5-årsperioden så är det ett totalt skift. Medvetenheten om att man har inget att be för. Vi har en tuffare omvärld som ställer större krav i det här hänseendet. Har blivit mycket, mycket större. Och det ligger inte bara på toppnivå inom företaget, utan har även sjunkit ner på lägre nivå i företaget. Vi har jobbat aktivt med det här från compliance-sidan så att vi håller årligen så att säga försöker beskriva regelmiljön och varför det är viktigt att man har koll på regler och så, att man måste acceptera sakernas tillstånd. Men sen är en sak som hänger ihop med det här, det är lite grann hur ska compliance jobba? Hur ska man förhålla sig till verksamheten? Det här kommer in på det här med rådgivning och kontroll, kontra kontroll. För det första är det ju flytande gräns. Vad är rådgivning och vad är kontroll? Men det finns ändå de här två förhållningssätten att förhålla sig till rådgivning eller kontroll. Det har varit så inom vår compliance-organisation att det är rådgivningen som har varit i högsätet och det är det som ledningen efterfrågar. Man vill ha råd och stöd och det har vi anammat och jobbat med också. Rådgivningen har, i alla fall en bra rådgivning i min värld, det är att man kan beskriva så att säga vad regelverket säger på ett visst område. Ofta befinner man sig, Johannes var inne på det där, men vi menar kanske samma sak. Ofta befinner man sig i gråzoner där man kanske, det är oklart vad som gäller på området. Det är i alla fall under komplext. Men man ska kunna beskriva det här för ledningen och man ska också kunna, om man befinner sig nära gränsen för vad som eventuellt kan vara legalt eller rent av går över den, så måste man kunna beskriva riskerna för affären. Och jag tycker också att man som compliance ska kunna gå ett steg till. Man ska kunna rekommendera affären hur affären ska agera med hänsyn till affärsmöjligheten kontra den legala risken. Det tycker jag man bör vara beredd att göra. Och jag har jobbat mycket med det och det ser likadant ut i övrigt i compliance-organisationen i SEB-koncernen. Man har också rekryterat människor där rådgivningsfunktionen faller sig naturligt. Men det gör också att vi har byggt fast oss i en rådgivningskultur. Så att vi har svårt, vårt problem generellt inom SEBs compliance, det är att möta de externa kraven, alltså reglerarnas krav, att vi ska kunna visa upp, att vi följer upp och kontrollerar och dokumenterar. Vi jobbar väldigt mycket på det, men vi måste ändra strukturen och vi har som sagt byggt fast oss lite grann i en rådgivningskultur. Det finns exempel på andra försäkringsbolag som redan från början har delat upp compliance-verksamheten i dels en rådgivande funktion och en uppföljande och kontrollerande funktion. Det här är en utmaning för oss. Det här handlar inte bara om att man slänger in vem som helst i den uppföljande och kontrollerande rollen, utan det är ett hantverk i sig, så att säga. Jag skulle vara helt värdelös på att hålla på med strikt kontrollerande verksamhet, stickprov och sådana saker. Så ser det ut, men för närvarande är rådgivning dominerande, men så att säga, de externa kraven innebär att vi måste utveckla den kontrollerande rollen inom koncernen. Sen om man tittar lite grann på regelutvecklingen som jag har ställt en del frågor här, men jag skulle vilja säga så här att vi kan nog se, vi har haft en extrem regelutveckling under de senaste åren, men vad vi kan se framför oss, det är definitivt fortsatta regleringar. Det är inget snack om det. De kommer nog huvudsakligen om man tar de stora penseldragen, vara inriktade på kundskyddsfrågor, intressekonflikter och genomskinlighet och transparens. De kraven kommer att öka definitivt. När det gäller mer governance-frågor, risk och riskhantering och sådana saker, så kommer, som jag ser det, där kommer Solvens 2, det är det centrala området på försäkringsområdet så att säga. Där kommer det ske en stabilisering i och med att Solvens 2 landar och man börjar tillämpa reglerna så att säga. Men och ser man ändå längre sikt så kommer det nog på ett eller annat sätt komma en reaktion mot all den här regelmängden och regelbördan. Kanske inte på det sättet att det kommer avregleringar utan snarare kommer att det sker omregleringar. Den totala regelmängden leder ju till beteenden, arbitragebeteenden och sådana saker. Det kommer man jobba med att täppa till. Sen så kan man nog säga det också, ett huvudspår i regleringen kommer att vara, det är ganska stora skillnader på försäkringsområdet när det gäller kundskydd och information och sådana saker på försäkringsområdet å ena sidan och bank- och värdepappersområdet och den andra. Där har bank- och värdepapper kommit längre. Det är oundvikligt som jag ser att försäkring måste in i stort sett i samma folla så att de kraven kommer därmed att öka så att säga. Jag har också ställt frågan om man uppnår syftet med regleringarna. Ja, det återstår att se, men jag kan inte tycka annat för jag har jobbat med regleringar själv och vet hur man hanterar internt. Och nu jobbar jag på företagssidan så att säga. Och en sak som är ganska klar tror jag, jag tycker att de regleringar som kommer, syftet med dem är ganska självklara, men det är i alla fall i min värld helt klart överregleringar. Reglerna är för komplexa så att när man ska implementera det här i företagen så tittar man inte nästan alls på de risker man vill komma åt genom regleringen. Allting är uppfyllt av form. Hur ska vi uppfylla de här regelkraven? Och man tänker knappt på vilka risker som de här regelkraven syftar till att rätta till. Men det här är en kulturfråga för att jag vet att inom EU till exempel så är det vissa länder som tycker att till exempel på Solvens 2-området där vi tycker att det kommer alldeles på tok för mycket regler enligt vår inhemska tradition som tycker att det är för lite regler. Så alltså att det är det är olika synsätt på det. Men det här är min subjektiva uppfattning att det är en överreglering. Komplexiteten i reglerna har antalet regler och komplexiteten i dem har ökat dramatiskt under de senaste 5 åren, helt klart. Och det gör att man kanske missar fokus på vad man egentligen är ute efter. Sen så behövs compliance. För mig är det i alla fall helt okontroversiellt. Alltså, det är klart att compliance är här för att stanna den funktionen. Och om inte annat så kan man se i de regleringar som kommer i Solvens 2 så är det lagkrav på compliance. På bank- och värdepappersområdet i lagstiftning som redan finns så ska man ha compliance. Men det är det formella, utan tvekan också den här nya regelmiljön som vi har nu med den omfattning av komplexiteten som finns i reglerna så är det liksom i sak vi måste ha någon funktion som kan hjälpa organisationen att ta hand om det här till skillnad från bolagsjuridik till exempel och kundjuridik och sådana saker. För de har den dagliga verksamheten som de måste ha fullt upp med. Det avtal, det förhållande till kunder, affärspartners och sådana saker. Man räcker inte till för att kunna hantera den här typen av regleringar. Så, men ska man se för framtiden för compliance, alltså compliance är här för att stanna, utan tvekan är det så. Rollen, men det är en ny företeelse här i Sverige förhållandevis ändå, om man jämför med de anglosaxiska länderna och i Europa. Så att rollen kommer bli tydligare, mer befäst och etableras. Nu famlar man ofta, vad ska vi göra som compliance? Det är ofta det man får höra på seminarier. Och man är fortfarande lite sökande, men det här kommer etableras. Det kommer bli självklart att compliance kommer att finnas för överskådlig tid. Sen kan man fråga sig också då en avslutande fråga, är compliance bra för affären? jag var lite tveksam till det när jag började som compliance. Jag såg compliance strikt som någonting som man behövde för att följa regler, så att säga. Men om man tittar på det här med business compliance så är det alldeles uppenbart, så att säga. Det är helt centralt, och det har jag sett konkret när jag har sett SEB Life International jobba. Det är en helt central funktion i det operativa arbetet, så att säga. Men även när det gäller general compliance så har jag också upplevt att även där har det betydelse för affären. Självklart, om man kan undvika sanktioner och sådana saker, om compliance kan bidra till det, är det naturligtvis bra för affären. Men våra affärspartner efterfrågar på ett helt annat sätt än förut att man ska kunna visa upp vad har ni för governance och compliance-struktur. Hur hanterar ni olika typer av compliance-risker? Vad har ni för struktur? Hur ser er compliance-organisation? Vad har de för arbetsmetodik och sådana saker? Det efterfrågas i kontraktsförhandlingar. Så att compliance är bra för affären, både ur business compliance-synpunkt och ur general compliance. Ja, det var i stort sett... Jag tror jag lyckas hålla tiden riktigt hyggligt. det var vad jag hade att säga. Ja.
Very interesting, bra. We have now, of course, had a general view on how things are running in SEB. So thanks a lot for that, Håkan. Also that you showed the general view, of course. Also SEB, of course, we know is a bank and also has insurance operations. So there is, of course, also that dimension. And you also reflected on some parts of the business compliance, how you do this in SEB. So that was, I think, a good start. And I know that this is now the right time for at least to keep the whole morning running. So we decided that we will have now the session with Axco right now, and then we will have a break. So I hope you keep the energy high, and we will have now a bit more of a zoom into the topic. So while you get started, maybe I just introduce you briefly. So Carol and Adi, if you want to come upstage. I think your the presentation is on the screen, ready? Okay, perfect. So whilst you get started, let me just cover the 2 minutes here. We have been, and we will hear a little bit more about that in a second, been in contact with Axco for a while now. You must be aware of the fact that and we will see this now, and it's, I think, quite interesting, and you will probably understand much better after the speech now what we mean with that. That this topic is very complex, I said that before, and you need a wealth of information in order to be compliant in the various markets. And as of course we are not only operating, or Swedish companies do not only operate in the European context, where you would maybe apply the, so to say, European freedom of services, where things are fairly easy. If we go abroad and outside of Europe, things really get more complicated. And I'm very glad that we could have Axco with us today. We have had you with us in Copenhagen. In the fall, we had a similar conference in Copenhagen just before, well, in the fall before Christmas, because of course this topic is not only a Swedish one, this is a general topic. And as we are market leader in Denmark as well, we have done, of course, also the exercise to talk about these issues in Denmark as well. So, happy that you're here. Warm welcome again, and the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Well, first of all, a brief introduction. My name is Ali Mufti, and I'm joined here by my colleague Carol O-Young. We both represent the account management team at Axco Insurance Information Services in London. So thank you very much for inviting us here to speak today. It's a privilege to come all the way to Stockholm and escape the rain, although it's a little bit colder than we expected, but no, it's a privilege and a beautiful city, so thank you. Today we'll hopefully give you a little insight into some of the complexities in multinational insurance, particularly with a focus on compliance. I'll hand you over shortly to Carol, who will talk you through the substantive part of the presentation. But But to build on what you said, Johannes, that compliance is a very tricky subject, particularly when you go global. So hopefully we'll give you some indication into some of the complexities that we encounter. But before we proceed on that stage, I thought I'd give you a brief introduction as to who Axco are and what it is we do, in case you didn't know. So Axco, let's start the slides. Axco has been around for approximately 40 years. Our speciality is reporting on multinational or global insurance intelligence. So it's a particularly tricky subject, but we've been doing it for quite some time now. Not me personally, but I don't think I've been around for that long. So business critical compliance and market data, and we span the sectors non-life, life, and also employee benefits. So quite expansive, the subject, and particularly when you reach a global span, it becomes quite complicated. But our focus tends to be on compliance and the regulatory environment, but we also look at aspects, market practices, and statistics and analysis, and across those sectors that we said. I mean, our information basically transcends many different areas of information. Any information that you think you might need when you're looking at another market, that's what we try and harness. It could be anything from the political environment, the general demographics of a country, spanning then into the compliance, then line of business specific information. It can be quite dense, the information, but today we're going to look specifically at compliance. And so who is Axco's market? Quite simply, it's the insurance industry. We fulfill the role that the insurance industry asks us to, in the sense that any insurance professional looking to venture into foreign markets, they need a certain level of information. It's far too inefficient and expensive for them to do it themselves, so that brought about Axco's very existence some 40 years. So we fulfill that role on behalf of the market, and we're able to therefore report unbiased and independently. I mean, that's a very important topic that I'll get into in a little bit later. So naturally our market is the international, those insurance professionals who look at the international markets, who are looking to venture into cross-border territories, and that spans the world's foremost insurers, brokers, reinsurers, anyone really in the insurance industry, but also increasingly some risk managers as well, and direct the buyers as well. So Axco's business model, I touched on it just then. It's we like to consider ourselves an outsourced information provider to the industry. So some 40 years ago, when our then director came up with the idea to fulfill that role, it's come on a lot since then. It started off just as a report, a paper report that was carried around Lloyd's and sold on a trolley, but it's developed a little more since then, particularly in response to the advancing technological needs. So in the past 5 years, we've advanced on a lot of technological platforms, questioning tools. It's a tricky area to venture into. But so just to elaborate a little further on our business model, mutualized outsourcing model. That's what we like to consider ourselves. The independence of Axco is very important. If ERV is looking to go into another market in Africa, I mean, it'd be very difficult to get into the regulator's office and get all the questions that you need answered, as well as then to go to a potential competitor and get them to explain to you what the difficulties are of going into that market. I very much doubt they'll volunteer that information. So Axco's existence as an independent outsourcer to the industry is a very important one, and one that's very much founded on trust. The industry trusts us to go out and get the information, and we trust the industry to support us in that endeavor. long-term partnerships. That's a very crucial part and central to our existence. Over the years, we've established very important relations with our information sources, so the regulators, the key players in a market. You need to have their trust in order for them to volunteer the information, and it takes a lot of time as well. To sit in front of these people. They're not going to just give anyone the time of day to give you that key market information that they give to us now. But that's very much founded on the basis that we have long-term relationships with these with our partners. And understanding our clients' individual requirements. I mean, the dynamic industry that we live in, global insurance is incredibly dynamic and changeable. And it's very important for us to keep our fingers on the pulse and ensure that we know what the trends are so we can report accordingly. There's no point in us funneling the same information year in, year out without responding to the needs of the industry. So that's an important aspect. Just to go a little further about the, about the model, I've explained a little further there. Understanding our clients' individual requirements and interaction with our clients. All of these are fundamental to Axco's very existence. And as alluded to earlier, things are moving on quite significantly on the technological scale. So Carol will take you through, right towards the end of the presentation, a few of our services which, as Johannes alluded to earlier, the complexities of compliance, the questions that you need to be aware of, the taxes. There's all sorts of tools and mechanisms which can help you through that process and make sure that you don't miss any crucial steps or sidestep any issues. So I've kind of glossed over how we get our information. It's very important. I mean, it's not just desk-based in London. We don't just sit there on Google and Google information. I'm sure that would be a lot easier. But no, for 40 years now, we've been sending industry experts and with people with experience in the industry to physically visit the countries that we report on. I mean, we report on 180 plus territories around the world, and we send our industry consultants. I mean, Axco itself is quite small. We have 40, 50 staff in London, and we employ around 20 or 30 consultants who go out and travel around the world, and very lucky for them, although some of the locations aren't as desirable as, say, Stockholm, but no, lucky them. And so the primary source of information is the information that they procure on the ground. They go, knock on the door of the regulator, and sit down with them for 3-4 hours, over a course of days, and they have a detailed list of 3,500 questions and rattle through them day in, day out. It's quite laborious, but it gets the job done. And as alluded to earlier, it's very important. The long-term relationship aspect is crucial. They may withhold information if you don't know them particularly well. So the longer you know them, the better the information quality. It's not just the regulators or the associations that they meet. It's the key market players in those markets. So if you're going to a new far-off country, they meet with the presence on the ground, the brokers, the insurers, the reinsurers, and anyone really fundamental to the insurance market so that they can get a feel for how insurance is conducted in that market. It's not something you can get when you're sitting thousands of miles away on your computer. It's a sense that they get. And it's continued throughout, even when they're back, they carry on with email correspondence, copy the Axco report. Once we finish the report, they hand it back to the regulators or their contacts so they can review all the information they've given, just in case that we haven't reported something that they don't want us to share. Global user feedback is another continual importance with Axco. We have continued contact with our clients, ERV, Munich Re, practically the whole insurance industry, and they review our information, and on a day-to-day basis, they give us feedback. And it's very important that loop of information is kept fresh and up to date. And our team and there's several other teams which are hot on the heels of all the clients and make sure that they tell us where we're going wrong. Not that often, but sometimes it does happen. And we have a dedicated in-house research team who sit there on their computers the whole day and check and recheck the information and supplement the information with what the writers get when they move abroad. And finally, partners, partner associations, risk manager associations, insurance associations. We partner up, we share as much information with them, we collaborate with them, and they in turn give us a feel for the trends in certain markets and for certain industry players. But so it's a well-oiled machine. We've been doing it for quite some time, and but at the same time, we're not one to rest on our laurels. We're always looking to move forward and progress into new areas. And to that note, I will pass the reins over to Carol, who will talk you through the far more interesting side of this presentation.
Good morning, everyone. So Ali's taken the role of good cop, so I now step in as bad cop to talk to you about the business insurance side. So let's just get these points up here. Okay. So before we go into the complexities of business compliance, just to clarify, the purpose of this presentation is not to answer the questions that you may have, but it's to raise awareness. It's to make you question, when you look at structuring international policies in future, what do I need to be aware of? What do I need to know? What are the fines and penalties that could be imposed on me as an organisation if I do not comply? Okay, so it's a case of comply or die, as we say. So the challenges of international insurance are many, but just at the very top level. So we have international companies, globalization brings international risks. 196 countries in the world that we're aware of. Now, in terms of actual jurisdictions, there are in excess of 200 if you take into account some of the islands in the Pacific. Okay, but in terms of actual countries, 196. Looking at the way in which the market has developed, if you look at territories or countries such as Brazil, the regulatory landscape there is changing at a very rapid pace. If you look at somewhere like Ghana, for example, or some other African countries, it's changing at a much slower pace. Okay, so you need to consider, is it an emerging market in terms of the insurance industry, or is it developed, well-funded, and getting more intense? So the aims of regulations, so the laws are not designed to protect the international insurance companies, they are designed to protect the financial systems. As Johannes alluded to earlier, governments, how to raise money, how to swell their balance sheets. What easier way to do it than to look at the tax situation? Who hasn't been complying? And we are aware that in Canada, for example, the government there has gone back, I think, 5 or 10 years to look at who has not been complying over that period. So this is not new, but perhaps the rate at which regulators now, as supervisors, are looking at who hasn't complied is picking up momentum and is stepping up. Accepting grey answers, it is complex. Some of the insurance laws are not 100% clear as to what the situation is in terms of compliance. There are some grey areas there. We look at market practice. You need to be aware as well, what is the market practice in that territory? So this compliance abroad checklist, is there one more? Yep, is not intended to be exhaustive. Again, it's just raising awareness. What do I need to be aware of? You can see the points there. Taxes and charges, again, be aware, it's not just taxes that you need to be aware of, it's other levies, parafiscal charges. When we go through the journey here, we'll look at, say, writing a risk in Australia, which, as you know, is country level, state, federal level, and the different states as well. There are different taxes and charges that apply to different states. Just for awareness, in the US, for example, in Kentucky, there are 37 pages worth of taxes. No, I haven't read them, but we do have a tax team in AXCO whose job it is to research that level of detail. So just be aware, it's not always just Fed level, it's state level and then municipal level as well. So just taking on some of those points there on the compliance checklist. So just be aware of your market environment. So just taking two quite different examples. If we look at Ghana, if we look at Brazil, so the major differences there, we have the population. Look at the urbanization as well. So the higher the level of urbanization would indicate the more sophisticated the insurance market is. So a higher level of urbanization, you can see there in Brazil, we're looking at 84% compared to 52% in Ghana. Brazil, therefore, you would expect the insurance market to be more sophisticated in terms of life assurance, in terms of motor insurance, property, household homeowners type policies, commercial, industrial. You would expect, therefore, the premium spend and the insurance penetration to be higher than, say, in an African country. Look at the investment going into the country. We've used there for Brazil an example, World Cup, something to do with football apparently, and the Olympics as well, so lots of investment going into the country. It's on the world stage now, the world is focusing on Brazil, so therefore, how does that affect the insurance market there? Okay, natural resources, very different, oil, gold, as opposed to exports, gold, cocoa, for example, in Ghana. So again, just focusing on market environment. Just again, be aware of the, what we're showing here is the GDP in Ghana and Brazil as opposed to the written premiums. So I don't know if you can see, it might be a bit small, but the scale on both is the same, it's 1 to 100. So in Brazil, for example, you can see the GDP rising up, okay, whereas the written premiums there, and this is to the end of 2012, the written premiums, as you can see, from around about 2001, 2002, it's risen quite exponentially, okay? So again, be aware of the market environment, what are the reasons for that? If we look at Ghana, you can see there the curves, the GDP and gross written premium, kind of quite aligned. Okay, so it'd be interesting to see in Ghana what happens post 2012, 2013, 2014. Okay, so the purpose of this slide is, as we alluded to earlier, we're just talking you through how the regulation has changed over the years. So if we look at Ghana, it can take the process to have a law enacted through Parliament, can take several years, whereas if we look at Brazil, it can be a very quick process. Okay, so the example we've given there is that between 1989 and 2006, there have been 3 kind of major changes, whereas if you have a look at Brazil, 2006 to 2009, that's 3 years, that's 4 different resolutions passed in that 3-year period. And those resolutions, as we've said there, was just to set out the basis of premium and loss reserve. So that's a rapidly changing landscape in terms of regulation and control. One more, nope, excuse me. Okay, so before we start our journey, we're just going to look at here at the very top level, the 4 main ways in which to write international business. So we can look at admitted, where the policy is issued locally from a locally authorized company, cross-border agreements, for example, FOS, fronting, using a local office and reinsure it back, non-admitted, where the insurer is not authorized by that supervisor in that country to write the business. Okay, so if we just have a very quick look at what is meant by non-admitted or unlicensed, so I'll just give you a few seconds or so to digest that paragraph there. So some of you may be aware of this already, but crucially, what is meant by non-admitted or unlicensed? Okay, so non-admitted insurance refers to the placing of insurance outside of the jurisdiction of the country in which the risk is based. Okay, so let's start our journey. Right, map of the world. So we're looking at a Swedish insurer. That big dot there is supposed to represent Sweden. So let's have a look here. So what we're going to do now is just take you on a little travel around the world. So we're looking at a Swedish insurer writing a policy in Sweden. On what basis can they write that? Moving further afield, the second cross just there is Spain. Moving down a bit into Egypt, down into Western Africa, to Ghana, across to South America, Brazil, down to Australia, and we'll have a look at the different ways in which, to be business compliant, you can write insurance. Okay. So starting off with Sweden. So we're looking at writing here local policy. So we're writing it on an admitted basis. So the insurer has been authorized by the supervisor in Sweden to provide insurance services. So we're using a locally licensed and regulated company. So what are the pros here for doing it on this basis, on an admitted basis? So with a local insurer, you would expect the local insurer to have a good relationship, a good dialogue with the regulator, frequent discussions taking place. They should be aware of the local regulations, and therefore they should have the resource and the processes to make sure they abide by them. Okay, just be aware again, raising awareness that certain compulsory insurances in the country have to be placed with insurers who have been specifically authorised by the supervisor to write that class of business. Okay. In terms of the insurance market in Sweden, it is sophisticated. Several multinational companies have presence in Sweden. Therefore, there shouldn't really be a need to look outside of Sweden, looking to write most lines of business. Okay, so we go a bit further afield now, looking at Spain. Okay, so again, insurer in Sweden, looking at a risk located in Spain. What are the options we have to write this? We can look at writing this under Freedom of Services, FOS. So FOS legislation was created to create one single insurance market. Okay, so an insurer in one EEA, not EU, in one EEA member state can provide insurance services to another EEA member state, provided that they notify the supervisor in their home country. Okay, so FOS is an international agreement. What are the benefits of this? It's as if the insurer is locally licensed. Taxes and charges, again, just raising awareness. Is the tax liability attaching to Sweden, where the insurer is, or does the tax liability attach to where the risk is located? So some of you may be aware of the Caverna ruling, which the ruling of that is that the tax liability, so insurance premium tax, must be paid to the supervisor in the country in which the risk is located, not where the insurer is based. Okay, so again, just be aware of certain things relating to taxes. So some of the benefits of FOS, moving outside of the EEA zone, some of the French territories in islands such as Guadeloupe, French Guiana, they can also be subject to FOS because those territories apply French law in their entirety, and they are classed as regions of France. Okay, so again, just something to be aware of. Some of the downsides of FOS, we're using the example of Ireland. If you're writing a risk located in Ireland, just be aware that even if you're not writing it using an Irish entity, or if the insurer is not headquartered in Ireland, you are still obliged to pay a supervisory levy there. Okay, and if you don't do it, you're not compliant. Okay, so where's our next trip? Egypt. So, outside FOS, we don't have a presence there. So how can we look to write this business? So we can look up to set up a locally licensed office. So note, not a branch of the Swedish entity, but actual local office based in Egypt. So the pros there, to have local presence there in Egypt, it would give you a high level of compliance confidence. For the insured, for the buyer, they have a local broker. They have local policy wording issued. Premium payment and terms should mirror that imposed by the Swedish entity. There is local capacity there to be tapped into. Some of the cons, again, to get that local knowledge, you need to have the investment there to employ local expertise. What are the demands of the supervisor if you're looking to set up a local office in Egypt? We are aware, and as reported in the Egyptian insurance market report, to the supervisor, you need to submit your business plan for the next 5 years, and we understand that you need a starting capital of, I think it's 8.6 million US at present. So may not be seen as a con, but again, if you don't have that level of investment, just again be aware of these requirements before you actually look to write business in this way. Okay, next, go into Australia. So Australia here, we see there, so non-admitted is permitted. Okay, so even if I'm not authorised by the supervisor to provide insurance services in Australia, I am permitted to do it, if it's at the insured's initiative. But again, be aware, certain compulsory classes, such as workers' compensation, do need to be written by insurers that have been given specific authority by the supervisor in that country. Okay. So taxes and charges, Australia, as you would probably expect, like Canada and the US, bit of a minefield. There's a federal level and then there are the state levels as well. So we understand that with the exception of GST, goods and services tax, there is the taxes and charges for non-admitted are the same as admitted policies. Okay, so for example, there is what they call a deemed profits tax of 3%, not 0.3%, but 3% of the premium, which can be quite high. And there are also fire services levies as well imposed in Tasmania, New South Wales, you need to be aware of. And also as well, there are some other supervisory levies as well that apply to different states depending on the policies you're writing and depending on the premium that's going through the books there. Some downsides of doing this in Australia, if we're doing it non-admitted, is claims management. So if you are based in Sweden, for example, time difference, how effective can that claims management process be? So again, just issues to be aware of. Okay, so where are we now? Brazil. Non-admitted is not permitted. Big red cross there. So how can we look to do this? We can look to use a fronting partner. If you're looking at a one-off risk in Brazil, a fronting may not be the most cost-effective way of doing it. Before engaging a fronting partner, you should, again, due diligence, know your customer, know your fronter, how accessible are, for example, the up-to-date financials of the fronting partner you're looking to use. Is there sufficient information there? Are you aware of all the local regulations? If you're looking to build a long-term partnership there and writing more business in Brazil, a fronter could be the right way of doing it. Okay. Again, awareness, complexities there. A fronter would write the policy for you and reinsure it back. So again, you would be exposed to reinsurance taxes, and the reinsurance taxes in Brazil are, suffice to say, fairly complex in nature. Okay. Again, just some things to note about Brazil. There are exceptions to that non-admitted is permitted, and these include where coverage is not available in the local market, or where, for example, there's lack of interest in the country, in Brazil, for providing that level of cover. You may be aware that where there are less than 10 companies operating in that relevant class of business, you are required to approach each of those companies before you must consult all those companies who write it before you can consider other options. Okay, Ghana. So absolutely big red cross. Non-admitted is not permitted. Okay, so what happens here? So we're not looking at a fronting partner. It's too expensive. We can't meet with the supervisor's requirements to set up a local office here. What happens if we just say, okay, fine, I understand it's not permitted, but let's just go ahead and do it anyway. So what are the consequences? Penalties. We understand that the Ghanaian authorities can impose fines of up to 2,500 penalty points. One penalty point being an amount at a given time set by the supervisor. Could be a prison term, up to 5 years for non-compliance. That applies to countries such as South Korea as well, where non-compliance is 5 years. I mean, frankly, would you want to spend 5 years in jail for non-compliance? I wouldn't, personally. Some of you may think differently. You may think it's worth it. Reputational damage. So just to use an example here as well, we'd use the example of an international, major global sportswear brand whose headquarters were in Germany, and they had a master policy in Germany which covered a subsidiary in India. Okay, so the Indian subsidiary suffered a fire in the warehouse and submitted a claim through the parent company under the global master policy for, I think it was about $20 million US. Okay, so the insurer assessed the claim, fine, we're liable, so paid the corporate parent $20 million, and the corporate parent then wired that money through to the Indian subsidiary. The Indian authorities notified big claim payment coming into India. What's this all about? So the company argued, well, actually, the policy was written outside of India, nothing to do with India, and it's written by an insurer outside of India, so therefore don't tax us on it because it's nothing to do with you guys. The Indian supervisor decided not so. Because the money was seen to be income to the Indian subsidiary, it was paid back to India to benefit that subsidiary, and therefore they taxed the 20 million claim payment. So there, it's not just financial damage to the company, it's the reputational damage as well. So without giving away too much information, I guess in their case, it was a case of just don't do it, as opposed to just do it. Sorry, bad joke. I told you I was the bad cop. Okay. So just as a recap here, this colourful slide, which you can study in more detail when you get the presentation, you can see very quickly here the different locations where you're looking to write business potentially, the different ways in which you can write it, and some of the penalties that you may incur for non-compliance. Okay, how can AXCO help? So as Ali was saying before, it's not so much who we are. I mean, you've seen two of us. We are human people, but it's more what we are. So we're employed by the industry to be the industry's feet on the ground. So we employ insurance consultants, professionals who visit their assigned countries for up to a week at a time. They talk to the regulators, they get information to feed back to you, the insurance professionals. So some companies that we deal with have tried to replicate the AXCO model themselves before and very quickly find that the costs very quickly add up into the hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars. And it's not just the startup cost that you need to be concerned with, but it's the maintenance, the updating of that information as well, which can cost you money. So we just very quickly have a look at, I'll gloss over this. This is not really a sales pitch, but it's more raising awareness. So just looking at 3 of the products that AXCO currently offers, again, just raising awareness how the information there can help you assess the challenges of writing international insurance and to be compliant. The insurance market report, we have a life report as well, but just focusing here on non-life. So the chapter headings, which you probably can't see on the left-hand side, they delve into areas such as supervision and control. What do I need to be aware of? Legislation, projected legislation coming up, and existing legislation. Taxation, what are the complexities of the taxation, the levies, the parafiscal charges, and then it goes down into the main lines of business, for example, property, marine, energy, and it will give you some information on the lines of business, and it gives you some information on the statistics as well. And just looking at the delegate list, those of you from the major broking firms, you may be aware that you have access to this already. And if I can just be good cop for a second, it's all paid for centrally, so if you were to access this, it wouldn't cost you anything. So please do. As Ali was saying before, over the past 5 years, we have invested quite heavily, quite significantly in different, how should we say, delivery mechanisms. Okay, so prior to the technology coming in, the insurance market report, if you bear in mind that the non-life report on average can be 250 to 300 pages in depth. So when that was bound as a book, it was quite chunky. Okay, so we recognize that it's all very well providing you with this content, but if it's not usable, frankly, if I had a book of 300 pages for each country, I would be less inclined to go through it. So we're looking at delivering content through technology, delivery platforms. Insight Compliance, it breaks down the key Q&As for regulation into short form answers with the questions. The highlighted bit in green here shows you that the platform, the interface through which it's delivered, enables you to add your own corporate compliance, your in-house rules of the road as well. So it's an integrated tool that your employees can use, providing the AXCO content together with your in-house content as well. Compliance point, just touching on this briefly, this is again Q&A, and it actually encourages the user to input the salient points of their international insurance market program. So you enter your risk location, you enter the lines of business you're looking to write on, you enter the premium there, and the intelligent questioning mechanism will ask you relevant questions, closed questions, meaning that the answer is either yes or no, and it will help you structure it, and it will then go through to the end to the tax calculator, and it will enable you to see there, to be tax compliant, what do I need to be aware of? Okay, so Ali and I will be around afterwards if you want to talk about any of these points. And that, in a nutshell, is it. So if anyone is interested in product demos or you want to come and see us afterwards, please do approach us. So hopefully that hasn't scared you, but again, just be aware that moving targets, this thing of business compliance is very much here to stay, and please don't end up in jail for 5 years because of non-compliance. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to AXCO's comments. I think that was quite interesting to see a little bit how does that work in different countries. I think, of course, there were only 5 examples we chose, and but still it tells us, I think, a good story about how different also it is doing business in Europe and then going abroad. And I think that is certainly a challenge. Fronting partner, I can only say and confirm that with our partners in Munich Re, you know, of course, one of the, not even at the moment, after Swiss Re has been a bit weak lately, the leading reinsurance in the world. And it's our direct mother company, as you might know. And we have been working quite closely together with Munich Re in a couple of countries, including Brazil, by the way, to find out about fronting partners. And I can tell you that especially also as Carol showed, Brazil has been an immense challenge to us. We have looked at 2 fronting partners over the last 5 years, and it has been extremely demanding to find the right partner for this business in Brazil. And so this is truly a challenge, and I can only confirm what you said, that in some of these countries this is really, really a challenge. Another little snapshot I like to share with you is that that you, of course, in the travel insurance market are well aware of the fact that Ivory Coast might not be the issue, yeah, to put it that way, but Brazil very much is so, or Australia, or the US. We will talk about the US now a bit more, and therefore, of course, we can say that about 80% of the expatriation and corporate travel activities are in about 15 to, well, rather more to 25 countries worldwide. So that means those you need to be really good on. And then you can discuss, of course, about solutions in Ivory Coast. Yeah? And so that's what we have been seeing. So we are completely on a trip of focusing on the big shots, and then we will see how things are. So I think that's also important, that if some of our customers, companies come and they have maybe 2 or 3 people in Ivory Coast, of course, this is something one has to discuss and one has to be aware of. However, coming up with no solution in some countries, that's, of course, the larger ones, is really not the right way forward. So talking about the US being one of the prominent examples of that, I think, and Andreas and also Hartmut will come to that, I guess, in a second. Big topic there, Obamacare. You have heard about that. A complete new way of doing health insurance in the US, with a complete new setup of rules, unheard of. And we know how many Swedish companies are in the US. So this is certainly a topic that anyone that would like to offer this solution must be on top of and ahead of, for sure. So we will hear a bit more about that in a second. And I leave this now to you guys, because, and I guess you, Andreas, will also probably explain a little bit why we've been working together with you guys. Of course, we have also been working with Axco before. I mentioned Munich Re, and also another partner for us to put up a global solution on business compliance. That is the support we got from you guys lately. So, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Johannes. Thank you also for inviting us again to this compliance seminar. We've been to Copenhagen before, and we pretty much enjoyed it, and we also enjoy obviously escaping the so far quite dull German rainy winter and seeing real snow for the first time here in Stockholm. So thank you again. Maybe before I touch the subject that Johannes already announced, i.e. particular issues that we came across with regard to business compliance, maybe allow me to lose a few words on our firm. We are around for some 140 years. We are originally an American law firm, but spread, if you want, across the globe. We are present in 18 offices in almost all major commercial and financial centers. Unfortunately, Stockholm is one city missing in our footprint. Maybe we can change that at some point. We are advising clients on all sorts of legal areas that are relevant for their business, but in particular also advising in the insurance and reinsurance industry, and also intermediaries. We are advising on policies, on all sorts of agreements in this regard, on general corporate and governance matters, on insurance M&A and restructurings, recapitalizations, but also security offerings, you name it. So everything around the insurance industry we can cover, and also cover not only in Germany or the US, but we have a kind of multi-jurisdictional approach. So whatever your need is as a company, we are able to put together teams to cater for that. And obviously one area that has some prominence and is still emerging is compliance. or as Johannes already put it, compliance is burdensome, compliance is expensive, that's right. But you also need to look at the flip side of the coin, and that is that non-compliance is definitely more expensive. I wouldn't go as far as Carol did and say that that you either have to comply or die. Let's see. Don't know whether we are that far yet. At least not in kind of most civilized countries. But definitely, I think you these days you cannot afford any longer non-compliance. Shortly to myself, I'm a lawyer in the Frankfurt office of Sherman Sterling. I'm advising clients on corporate law, M&A, but also in particular clients from the insurance industry, also on regulatory and compliance issues. And I'm also the compliance officer of our firm responsible for Germany, so I share your pain when it comes to compliance, right? Having said that, we will only touch briefly on two selected business compliance issues. One is sanctions compliance. That may be more relevant for P&C insurers rather than life insurance companies, and then on international or global health insurance policies. So I hand the microphone, if you want, over to my colleague Hartmut, who will deal with the sanctions compliance, and I will say a few words after that on the global health insurance policies. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andreas. I'm also a lawyer at Sherman & Sterling in the Frankfurt office, and I'm the regulatory expert in Germany. And I would like to report some information regarding sanction compliance in Europe and as well as the US sanction compliance. I start with I think, most important definitions regarding sanctions, and will step over to the overview of worldwide embargoes and sanctions. And then to bring it to life, I will give you an example with respect to the Iran sanction regime of the European Union. The most important question for you and your companies is, how are you dealing with these guys? And I think, and if you are dealing with these guys, you have a big problem. And now I step over to I think from my point of view, the most important risk of non-compliance with sanctions. That's a reputation risk. You see, every non-compliance, every violation of sanctions will give you the chance to read your name in the newspapers, and that's, I think, the most important risks in this regard. Let me tell you something about the definitions and the terms. What are the sanctions?
Maybe if I could just jump in there with regard to the clipping right left at the top, that concerned investigations of the US regulators against non-US reinsurance companies on violation of Iran sanctions. So basically, even if you are a non-US insurer, you have to be very careful what you're doing. And so please pay attention to what Hartmut is saying.
Okay. What are economic sanctions? Economic sanctions are a political instrument to restrict freedom of trade, especially with regard to certain goods, especially military goods, weapon of mass destruction and such things. And they are ordered for foreign and security policy reasons against several countries and several legal and natural persons. Prohibition of any trade whatsoever is very rare used, and it's called full embargo. We come to this point later. We have mainly three types of economic sanctions. First, financial sanctions, freezing of funds and whatsoever, and trade sanctions with respect to products, and trade sanctions with respect to services. And you see, insurance is under trade sanctions services, but it has to do with trade sanctions regarding products. For example, the insurance for trade with weapons and nuclear technology is prohibited all around the world. Now you can see, now I come to some institutions which offers or which implemented sanctions in the past. First, the United Nations. The United Nations has had a broad variety of various sanctions against states and organizations. You see the example Al-Qaeda, and we have always these lists divided in natural persons and organizations related to Al-Qaeda. And if you have a look here, if Mustafa Abbas is your customer, always big problem. Then the European Union has several sanctions in place. They are directly implemented by several regulations, and they always contain an extensive list of people whose funds must be frozen, various types of trade sanctions. But European sanctions are always well aimed. They always want to protect civil population, and so no total prohibition, no full embargo is in place in the European Union. In the United States, we have the strongest sanction regime worldwide in place, especially since September 11. It is implemented by several regulations, and we have an extensive list with natural and legal persons, the bad guy list. And in the US, we have total prohibition to trade with several countries, and this applies for US and non-US persons and companies. Yeah, what are the consequences in cases of violation? We have a very wide range of consequences. For sure, penalties and fines, imprisonment, up to the close down of your business, especially in the US, and of course the reputational risks as well. Here there is a short overview of the current US sanctions which are in place. You see the red ones are the full embargoes in place right now. Iran is changing currently, but Cuba and Sudan is still in place. And Syria, I think it will be more intensive in the near future. Now we come to the example. As I mentioned, we start with the Iran sanction regime of the European Union. Why Iran? Because it's, I think, the most relevant, most strongest sanction regime of the European Union. And Iran is one of the largest economies in the Gulf region with huge oil and gas reserves. And it's still, I think, a very interesting place for business and will be even more interesting in the future. The Council regulation of the European Union contains several restrictive measures. It starts from the export and import restrictions, especially nuclear weapons, war weapons, dual-use items. That means products that can be used in a civil but also in a military way. It's mostly all about telecommunication products. And it goes up to freezing of funds and economic resources and restriction on insurance and reinsurance for any trade. Last week, everything changed in the European Union. certain sanctions have been lifted for a period of 6 months because the European Union and the US came into a dialogue about the Iranian nuclear program. And as a result of this dialogue, the European Union lifted some, not all, sanctions regarding Iran. The suspension includes mainly the trade with oil and petrochemical products and the related insurance services. And it also contains some rules regarding the financial transfer, the transfer of funds. They have to be now only notified and not even authorized by the relevant authorities. Insurance under council regulation is under the council regulation, which is still in place, is general prohibited for insurance and reinsurance, and that does not apply for brokering based in the EU to individuals acting in their private capacity, only if they're acting in the state capacity of Iran. And that's a general rule, and some detailed restrictions are in place for, as I said, export credit insurance for sale and supply for any trade with dual-use items, with nuclear developments, with military goods, and the insurance, the prohibition of insurance for the trade with oil and petrochemical products are currently suspended for a period of 6 months. Other restrictions are the restriction on financing of certain enterprises that are mainly state-owned Iranian enterprises, and freezing of funds of these enterprises. And a very important restrictions is the notification and authorization procedure for the transfer of funds and on financial services. An even more practical problem there too is that nobody will find right now a financial institution that still do business with Iran. So you can notify, you can authorize, you can get the authorization by the competent authority, but you will not find a bank that will manage the transfer in practice. The atrocity of the European Union Iran sanction regimes are especially Iran itself, Iranians, Iranian entities and bodies, as far as they are listed in the annex, that are mainly persons that belongs to the Iranian regime, and for sure European enterprises who would like to trade with them. Practical consequences for your business are, first, you have to do due diligence and to get a sense of your business or potential business with the states or persons affected by the sanctions. Step 2 is to implement the sanction issue into your policy, into your company business. And as a last step, you have to implement the sanction issue in your internal structure, especially in your organization, in the assessment of risks, and in your escalation to other practices, management and board.
Maybe one word about that quickly. That's obviously the trickiest bit, because you need to link up your person at the business front, the sales staff, with your compliance function, with your legal function maybe, and make sure that whatever they are not supposed to do, they're not doing. And if you look at the lists of goods, for example, you can't deliver to Iran, or you can't provide insurance for the transport of those goods or those goods itself. It could be that a ball bearing of a certain diameter is a prohibited dual use good because it can be used in centrifuges for uranium enrichment, but almost the same ball bearing that is just a millimeter smaller or bigger in diameter may not. So you have to also see how you diligence that on the business side, how you find out what your client or your customer is actually transporting or wanting to have insured. And these are very tricky issues. The same with regard to the people on the blacklists, because you're dealing with foreign names, with kind of foreign spellings. They're spelled differently. And I can tell you that certain names, if you kind of run them through an automated system, will give you a hit always. So do you switch that off? How do you deal with that? It's practically speaking, it is quite a tricky issue. And I would be interested if somebody is doing P&C or is actually looking at sanctions, who of you has actually a system in place there, an automated or a compliance system that deals with these issues? Well, you see, I mean, obviously more relevant for P&C insurers, but it may also be to a certain degree relevant for life and health insurance, right? Okay, maybe we swap sides quickly. Now I will just, time permitting, say a few words on global health insurance policies. Obviously this is a subject where Munich Re and ERGO took a very proactive approach. So they engaged us to have a look into their business practice and to advise on compliance issues in this regard. And I will just give you a brief overview of general issues, and then I have selected a couple of kind of country examples if you want. And for the interest of time, or in the interest of time, I may maybe only touch on the Obamacare issue that Johannes mentioned, because that seems to be one of the most interesting issues at the moment. So basically you will find that many European or EEA insurance companies actually offer health insurance policies with global coverage. Typical use is travel insurance, obviously, is student exchange, au pair, or studies abroad, expat insurance, and obviously also group insurance policies for employees sent abroad by their employers. How does that work? The insurance policy is usually sold to a resident in the given country where the insurer is authorized prior to the move of that insured person abroad. But we also see in some cases, in some instances, that policies are sold thereafter into the relevant foreign countries, and then obviously all the issues arise that Carol flagged in her presentation. Yeah, insurance is either prepaid for a certain period or is kind of paid from time to time via bank transfer, so that could also be an issue cross-border. And yes, when you're looking outside the EEA, you will find that usually you will not be licensed to do business in that relevant country. If you are, obviously you need to deal with the local licensing requirements. You're familiar with these, and you may or may not be compliant. But if you are not, you have to find out what the requirements are. You need to comply with. Sometimes you may have representative offices to deal with claims management and so on. Sometimes you may have fronting arrangements in place, but quite often in these kind of cases where insured people move across the border, you will find that they may end up in jurisdictions in countries where you don't have any representatives or business, and you maybe don't want to have that even. Now, when we're talking about these cross-border scenarios, we encounter several issues. Some relate to the insurance company, i.e. offering a policy with worldwide coverage may violate insurance supervisory law in certain countries. And that needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. As Carol already mentioned, and I'm quite grateful for that, Some countries don't take an easy approach on that. Some foresee fines for violations. Others, such I think as Singapore, I believe, may even go as far as arresting one of your board members at the airport if you are in breach of their supervisory regimes and they don't find that funny. So this is indeed something you need to pay close attention to. Another issue for insurance companies may be that if an insured person moves abroad, in addition to maybe not being in compliance with regulatory law in that given country, it may well be, in some cases, we came across that, fortunately not the standard case, that the substantive law, i.e. the insurance contract law of the specific foreign country may apply all of a sudden to your insurance contract. We came across that, for example, in Turkey, that all of a sudden, after a certain time of kind of residence in Turkey, the regulator would take the view that basically Turkish contract law would apply to insurance policies that you may have kind of entered into with or issued to let's say, a Swedish resident. So, and also consumer protection laws may apply. So in that case, you might end up in a Turkish court litigating over an insurance contract that you thought is just between you and a Swedish resident. Then obviously you need to look at issues related to the insured person. So they might be obliged under local law to take out mandatory compulsory insurance, and you need to see whether your coverage, the coverage you offer, actually kind of satisfies these requirements. And then again, it may well be that this person is not only obliged to take out certain coverage, but it has to do that with a locally authorized insurer in that affected country. Last point you need to consider, and I won't elaborate on that, is obviously taxes and charges, and that may be a very important issue as well for when you kind of look at your business case. So what are the issues when you as an insurance company are dealing with an insured person that moves abroad? What could trigger basically negative consequences with regard to foreign regulators? It can be things like even correspondence with the insured person. That's something that is sometimes permitted, sometimes not. Sometimes you can talk about certain issues, others not. The collection of premiums, and also the payments, obviously, of claims, and the engagement of local representatives to deal with your insured persons. Also, you may come across the need to adjust or amend your policies. For example, when you look at health insurance, usually that's at least what I find every year with my health insurance companies, they tend to increase their premiums. So you may need to amend the contract, or you need to maybe comply with compulsory regulatory law in Sweden, for example, and need to implement changes. Question is, if you do that, it's a change of the contract. If somebody is living abroad at that time, are you entering into a different contractual arrangement with that person, and are you conducting insurance business in that given country? Yeah. Some regulators take that view, actually. So there you need to be very, very careful what is allowed and what isn't allowed. And then obviously the question, how do I deal with a customer who is already abroad? Can I sell insurance policies? Can I do it and contact that person? Can I only do it if I'm contacted by that person actively? And so that actually we found differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some take a very liberal approach. Some are very, very restrictive. And obviously, in the age of the internet, this becomes more complicated when you look at how insurance policies may be even sold over the internet. How do you kind of make sure that somebody from Ghana doesn't buy your insurance policy, and by virtue of that, you on your next holiday to Ghana, if you like, you end up in prison, right? Then, if you look at the insured person, as you may be aware, local insurance law sometimes or quite often states requirements for compulsory insurance for residents, but also, for example, for short-term visitors, for au pairs, and so on. And there are three models that we observed. First of all, could be that the policy must meet certain minimum coverage requirements, have a certain quality, or it must be recognized by local authorities, or even, and that's the strictest case, underwritten by a locally authorized insurance company. Again, a violation may trigger adverse consequences also for the insured person. On top of that, as I said, also you as an insurer may then be in breach of local supervisory law and may incur fines and even criminal fines. Okay, I touched on that issue already, so I make it short. The risk is finally that you think you have your risk under control. You know your terms and conditions of your policy. You know what that means. You know how your local courts and regulators would see that. But then all of a sudden you end up in a foreign court deciding on whether a certain event is covered and to what extent. So here you need to make sure that you have the appropriate carve-outs in your policies to make sure that you don't end up in these scenarios. I have a couple of examples here, and I will just scroll through them quickly. I believe you will receive our presentation, so you can, if you're interested, have a look at these examples. So Turkey is one where we have found that actually the authorities take the view that their substantive law applies after a certain time. The issue that is, from my perspective, most interesting, and we are in close contact with ERGO, DKV, and also ERV on this, is the so-called Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, better known as to us as Obamacare, who for the first time stipulates a compulsory health insurance requirement in the United States. So we in Europe, and especially us in Germany, we know that for probably over 100 years. You probably also for quite some time. To the US, that's very new. It's a big project, and as I know from my advice to ERGO, it's still pretty much a moving target. So we, even though the insurance obligation entered into force for individuals at least 1st of January this year, there are certain issues that are still unclear, one has to say. So basically, under the new rules, US citizens and so-called resident aliens for tax purposes. So if you are resident, consider resident in the US for tax purposes, you have to take out health insurance that satisfies the requirements of Obamacare. Foreign insurance companies, and that was basically, I think, the status when we last talked about that in Copenhagen, could not provide that coverage if they're not regulated in the US. That has changed now because the administration saw that for their ambitious project, they need more capacity. So they basically agreed that also foreign insurers could provide that coverage if they are recognized and their policy is recognized by the US Department of Health and Human Services. A different issue, that's for, let's say, individual health insurance policies. For group insurance policies, the guidance that was issued end of October was, if you have a group insurance policy that is regulated under a foreign law, i.e. Sweden, that's fine. That is Obamacare compliant. We always had a bad feeling about that, and we told ERGO, well, we don't know whether that sounds too good to be true. And actually, that's not yet in the presentation. It's something we learned 2 days ago. They kind of pulled back and said, yes, if that satisfies certain requirements, so that's also open at the moment. Basically, if you want your health insurance policy that you offer, for example, to expats, to be Obamacare compliant, you must be compliant with the so-called substantially all test, i.e., you have to comply with substantially all requirements of the Obamacare insurance product. And at least when I look at the German market, the products that are offered in Germany will generally not be compliant, also not substantially compliant, because, and that you see here, you have a few prohibitions or a few qualities that this insurance coverage needs to have. For example, you cannot exclude coverage on the grounds of pre-existing conditions. Something, at least in private health insurance in Germany, is unheard of. Obviously, insurers can decide that they provide coverage, but not for certain illnesses that are pre-existing, or they would kind of increase the premium to have a risk-adequate premium. Again, something that in private health insurance in Germany you need to do to make your regulator happy, and obviously also your shareholders. In the US, it's a no-go in most areas. I think for kind of smokers, you have a certain liberty to kind of increase the premiums to a certain degree, but that's about it. So you cannot be as flexible as you are in Europe, for example. And you, for example, also need to cover mental health and drug abuse treatment, and that's something that, at least in the German private health insurance market, is usually carved out. So basically, the question is, what does that mean? To be honest, exactly nobody knows at the moment. Thing is, we are talking to the regulators. We have the impression they are quite flexible in order to get sufficient coverage, also for expats, and that they may be prepared to kind of waive certain of these requirements or don't look at them too closely. But what that means in detail is still unclear, is not yet tested. I think ERGO is a front runner there, and we are kind of looking into that at the moment, and also in discussions with the US regulator. One thing I can already say, if you have kind of long-term health insurance policies in place with terms and conditions that changed over the decades, it may not be advisable to go through that process, because you don't know the outcome. It might be very expensive, and at the end of the day, you might end up kind of giving this full coverage at a non-risk adequate price. But it may well be attractive for kind of travel insurance products or new expat insurance products. So that's something one can consider, and I think the market there, as far as I'm aware, neither US companies nor European companies are really covering that at the moment. Now, and this is my last slide, and then I will end. How do you approach a compliance review of your business, of your policies? I mean, you can take the view that you would need to kind of look at everything very closely and look at every country where you may have kind of customers who might have moved there, and you need to understand the regulatory environment there in full and so on. But you could also kind of go for a risk-based approach, looking at some kind of heat map. Where are significant numbers of customers of yours? Where have they moved? Which countries are important from a regulatory perspective for your business as a company or as an insurance group? Which countries are likely to have specific regulations, and which countries may have, if you want, draconic sanctions such as imprisonment, and where do you rather need to be compliant, and where could you take the view that a few customers there won't matter? I mean, as a lawyer, that may sound funny, but from a business perspective, I think you don't have a choice. And on that basis, you would develop, in case of ERGO with us, a question catalog for local counsel for us, or lawyers admitted in the various jurisdictions, to kind of test what actions may be problematic and what is all right. So you can adjust your policies, you can adjust your behavior, and you can inform your customers. And obviously you you then may also conduct local surveys of the law and your practice in this regard. And obviously, if you're thinking about that, we are more than happy to assist you with that. And here I end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that interesting presentation, and really glad to have you here today to enlighten us on some of the world topics on how to be compliant and challenge the world from a business and from an insurance perspective. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Patrick.
Då tänkte jag att vi skulle avsluta lite. Jag heter Patrik Ugander. Jag är försäljnings- och marknadsansvarig på ERV i Sverige. Och jag tänkte jag skulle berätta lite grann om hur vi jobbar med de här frågorna i Sverige. Och vi framförallt försöker utveckla och komplettera då det arbete vi gör med de produkter och tjänster som vi erbjuder inom ramen för internationellt resande inom framförallt företagssegmenten. Men jag tänkte jag skulle börja med en liten återreflektion av det vi sa tidigare här idag. Att, vad är det som egentligen driver den här situationen som finns idag? Varför har det gått så fort som det trots allt kanske har gjort? Man går tillbaka till 1962 så gjorde man en bedömning av att ett företag levde i snitt ungefär i 50 år. Och då pratar man Fortune 500-företag. En medellivslängd på ungefär 50. 2012 så var motsvarande medellivslängd 15 år. Och det sätter lite perspektiv på att saker och ting går extremt fort. Och det är två grejer som bland annat driver det här och som påverkar oss också i det arbete vi gör. Och det ena är globalisering. Både avseende rörlighet av människor, men självfallet också globalisering i rörelse utav affär och affärsverksamhet. Bolag som sprider sig runt om i världen, men också inte bara för att sälja sina produkter utan också för att säkerställa att man är konkurrenskraftig, producerar saker och ting på rätt ställe med rätt kompetens till rätt pris. Den andra stora drivkraften är teknologi. Teknologin idag möjliggör både för expansioner avseende företag, men den möjliggör också för en helt annan sak. Den möjliggör för olika typer av länder, regulatoriska institutioner och så vidare att på ett helt annat sätt idag skaffa sig kontroll över hur vi som företag, människor, rör oss runt om i världen och hur vi också agerar i de olika platser och i de olika sammanhang det finns. Det finns idag länder som sätter det här i system. System som innebär att man faktiskt följer hur människor rör sig för att identifiera skattesubjekt. Människor som är resande i ett företagsnamn och som är ute och jobbar och där både löneskatter, försäkringsfrågor och annat är sånt man försöker identifiera. Därför att det här har blivit en enorm inkomstkälla. Går man tillbaka 4-5 år så var det i många fall inte ens möjligt att göra det här. Idag så hanterar modern teknologi de här sakerna till ett kostnadseffektivt och mycket lönsamt sätt för företag att bedriva det här. Och Johannes nämnde det tidigare att samarbete mellan olika regulatoriska enheter runt omkring i världen, mellan olika länder, är också en del utav att den här frågan nu blir så oerhört aktuell. Och att det har blivit tuffare att förhålla sig till det här, det tror jag alla inser efter dagens presentation. Och Carol sa det att vi kanske inte kommer att besvara alla frågor, men vi kommer att lyfta på locket och visa på vad är det för olika saker man behöver tänka på. Hur ska man röra sig då i den här djungeln egentligen utav krav. Och titta då. Jag måste röra mig. Ja, men då är den inte på sig. Hallå? Är det? Jag vet inte om den... Det hörs ändå. Ja, nu? Ja. Okej. Vi provar, jag får tala tydligt. Om vi tittar då på vad har vi att förhålla oss till när det gäller det här i Sverige och ERV. Ja, dels så har vi ju den lokala svenska lagstiftningen och regulatoriska krav som finns på oss för att vi ska kunna bedriva den verksamhet vi gör. Ovanpå det så ska vi dessutom försöka hantera ungefär 193 olika länder och de lokala regler, rättsliga krav och föreskrifter som finns i de här. Och 193, det här är alltså de länder som, om man exkluderar då sånt som är till exempel under sanktioner, eller man kan också diskutera vad ett land är och inte är i vissa avseenden. Men i princip så är det här den mängden länder som de här compliance-frågorna handlar om då. Och det som är utmaningen i det här, det är att det som igår var sant om man tar fram en lista på alla länder, det är inte nödvändigtvis sant idag. Och dessutom är det så att beroende på hur företaget har etablerat sig till exempel, eller hur man förhåller sig till regulatoriska förordningar lokalt i landet, så är det också olika för olika företag och olika situationer. Så det går inte att säga att en sak gäller principiellt för alla. Det som är den stora utmaningen med det här egentligen, det är bland annat det som Axco pekar på och som de har byggt hela sin affär runt. Det är nämligen att hålla all den här informationen aktuell och uppdaterad och se till att den är tillgänglig i den verksamheten man är. Och sättet som vi då jobbar med det här idag, det bygger dels på då insikten och kunskapen som vi har från de här olika länderna och vad som gäller i dem. Och den informationen, den skapar vi egentligen med två olika nätverk. Dels ett internt nätverk som bland annat består av Munich Re, som består av andra bolag i vår koncern. Det består av ett team specifikt idag som finns etablerat i Sverige, Danmark och i Tyskland framförallt, för det är där som vi är stora på de här produkterna, även i Tjeckoslovakien och lite andra länder. Där vi har jurister, vi har produktspecialister och vi har ett dedikerat team av människor som jobbar bara med hur vi ska identifiera olika typer av lösningar, om det så är frontinglösningar i Brasilien eller andra länder, att kontinuerligt utveckla det här. Och det som har blivit den viktiga frågan för oss, det är ju att när det gäller compliance, att vara compliant, även om Carols comply or die är ett ganska hårt uttryck, så skulle man kunna säga så här istället: no more guessing. Alltså det går inte att gissa sig till och tro att det är okej för att det var det igår. Därför att de myndigheter, de regelverk som vi har att förhålla oss till, de har en helt annan insikt och kunskap om de här frågorna idag. Och precis som vi var inne på, att nu är det extrema fall, men de har inträffat att man helt enkelt plockar ut en person på identitet när de kliver in i ett land där de kanske aldrig varit förut, för någonting de gjorde hemma som helt plötsligt är straffbart när de kommer dit. Den är ganska intressant. Nu är det kanske inte så att man behöver sova jättedåligt för det, men man ska kanske fundera en gång extra när man kliver in i den här typen av affär. Det vi gör med den kunskapen som vi då får ut ifrån de här interna nätverken, och det är inte minst som vi skapar i våra externa nätverk, där vi då bland annat har Axco, vi har Sherman Sterling, men vi har också ett skattenätverk i form av en grupp som heter TMF, som hjälper oss att faktiskt utveckla möjligheten att betala skatt fungerande i alla dessa länder med olika regelverk, med olika förutsättningar, för att inte bara kunna vara business compliant utan också kunna vara tax compliant. Arbetssättet är egentligen en kombination av den här informationen, den här datan, kombinerat med vilka licenser, vilka förutsättningar vi har att agera i olika länder inom gruppen tillsammans med andra delar av verksamheten. Kopplat till hur våra produkter ska vara designade, hur de ser ut. Och också hur vi jobbar med information, hur vi jobbar med skadereglering och så vidare. Så att vi kan hantera det här i en global verksamhet. Det innebär till exempel att våra Eurocenters och Euroalarm är en oerhört viktig del i det här. De måste förstå vad de har att förhålla sig till också när de ska serva slutkunder som befinner sig i trånga situationer runt om i världen. Och slutligen, när vi tittar på den värdekedja som finns, så Den riktigt stora utmaningen är att mängden data och mängden information som man ska förhålla sig till och var den kommer ifrån överallt, den går inte att hantera i pappersformat och säga att ja, men jag vet vad det stod där förra månaden eller förra veckan. Utan det här måste man systematiskt bygga in i sin infrastruktur. Och det handlar i praktiken om att bygga in informationen i underliggande IT-system och databaser. Och faktiskt kunna göra det här till mer eller mindre ett automatiserat och systematiserat arbetssätt. Utifrån det så handlar det om för oss att koppla på rätt typ av stöd, rådgivning till er som partners, kunder. Och se till att ni gör rätt val eller har rätt förutsättningar att agera i de länder och i de situationer som det ska vara. Och där det slutligen blir den lösning och den produkt som vi kommer att kunna erbjuda och hantera förhoppningsvis under ganska lång tid framöver. Men som sagt, summeringen av dagen, det är väl ändå att det här är ett rörligt mål. Det kommer att förändras kontinuerligt hela tiden. Vi är committade till att fortsätta jobba med den här frågan. Vi tror att förutsättningen för svenska och internationella företag att växa och utvecklas är oerhört starkt kopplat till möjligheten att faktiskt röra sig på ett fungerande, tryggt och bra sätt runt om i världen. Och med det så tänkte jag egentligen höra, jag ser att han där, vd, vill säga någonting. Johannes?
No, it was just a question if we might go for a little round of questions as well. Patrick, what do you think? In the audience, so to say. Maybe there are some, of course, it was a long listening session now for you guys. So maybe it's a good idea to wrap up a little bit. What do you think with some questions? Okay, so here's the mic. Is there anyone around that has some questions you'd like to come up with? Maybe a couple of minutes of a little bit of discussion. I don't know, fire free. Or is that too unexpected? The first one always has a problem. Maybe I could do it. It's always good to have at least one question anyway, and then maybe I would really appreciate if you would also come up with some questions, honestly. I mean, we are a small group, we can discuss. But there was some. Okay, good, because I keep my one, but go ahead. You want the mic?
Hello, I'm Anne from Willis in Sweden. I have a short question about your network. If we are supposed to issue local policies, who are you actually working with? Who is behind Munich Re and your fronting partners?
Okay, Munich Re is very easy to answer. 60 countries worldwide, and we own in Munich Re primary insurance groups and companies, and also, of course, reinsurance operations. What we have been doing is that we have been selecting those markets where we have relevance. As I said before, the US is a good example, and Munich Re Group owns 2 primary insurance companies in the US. One we work with is called American Modern, and we are working on a joint, so to say, Obamacare compliant solution with them. And that gives us then, of course, the opportunity to either be US compliant, as it was, as also Andreas said before, in the old world, meaning only US carriers. Now it's a bit more relaxed, and we could even consider options from the outside. So that is one example, and there are many more. I mean, for instance, in Australia, that's another example where we have primary insurers in Munich Re Group we could work with. New Zealand is another one, and so forth. So I think for most of these parts where we are in countries where we are, so to say, having travel activities, and Munich Re is available, we work with them. In some countries, we have our own sister companies. Here, a good example would be, for instance, Russia. In Russia, outside of the EU, coming back to Carol's examples, there we would need to have a local insurance company. This is not a Munich Re company, but it's our EAV Russia sister company. Another good example, and we have already agreed on the fronting agreements with them. So we are compliant in Russia. And a last example is, for instance, working with Ergo companies. Ergo is, so to say, in between us and Munich Re, and they have also activities now in China and in India. So here we also build on these partners in the group. Where we have, so to say, no partner in the group, we have, of course, still the option that also Carol referred to, and that is non-admitted. Because in those markets where non-admitted is possible, and if we keep the rules and if we keep the tax payments, of course, straight, that is also possible. And with this analysis, so to say, we go through it and we chart every country. And that admittedly has also led us to some, of course, issues in the last few renewals, because there were some countries where we were not able to provide this coverage. And guess what? We said no. And I know that some of you, of course, didn't like that, but and also companies didn't like that. But now, having had maybe this day, you understand a little bit why we also say no in some cases. And it's not that we don't want to be supportive to you, but we just have to also see what we are standing in. You know, we have something to be, of course, in, so to say, in line with the rules, and still we want to be, of course, a custom caretaker. But it's a balance, you know. You can't be just here. You also must be here. So that is a challenge, and we admit that, and we have learned a lot over the past years. But we hope that the market will accept that as a reality, and that if you also understand more of that, that also in your communication to the customers, you could also tell the story. It's not that easy anymore. You know, the gray stuff, this like, oh, it'll work, that's over now. I hope that answers your question a bit about our network. Yeah, thanks. I had one question which I thought was interesting to maybe Dan. Dan Land is our head of sales in Denmark. And we had the conference in Copenhagen, as I said, in September. Dan, would you share briefly a little bit the feedback you got in the Danish market from our initiative, which was quite interesting, actually, I thought. So maybe in 2 minutes, because we have been starting in Denmark, of course.
Thank you. I will do it in English as well. I'm not sure my Danish will work. Yeah, thank you, Johannes. As you have heard a couple of times, we did the same kind of workshop in before Christmas in Denmark. And we also invited the big insurance brokers and the mid-insurance brokers, as well as the insurance companies, which was actually the main target in Denmark, all the competitors. And some interesting things have started to happen in Denmark. One thing is that we know that there are key players, meaning key competitors, that now have, so to speak, take the foot off the speeder and put it on the other pedal that stops the car instead, and said, oops, it seems like there's something going on here that we were not that aware of half a year ago. And we know that there have been cases where they have said to customers, we don't do this business for the time being because we need to look more into it. So it seems like, and that was of course also the purpose by the workshop, it seems like there have been some involvement in the thinking in the industry in Denmark that this is not just an issue we have, but it's an industry issue. That's one thing. The other thing that have happened as well is the customers have also started to react, especially the big industrial clients. So we have now, I would say for the first time, seen tenders last year where we have got specific questions on compliance. So the topic have been, what kind of compliance services can you provide? And the customers also in the tender material have said, we are aware that you cannot cover the whole world, but please tell us where can you do it, where can you not, and then we will find local solutions some way or the other, either through us, together with us, by the broker, by themselves, whatever it can be. So that is definitely two new development things we have seen in the Danish market, and we believe that will continue, not just in Denmark, but also in other countries.
Were there also some discussions with, for instance, Tryg?
Well, yeah, we have of course been approaching our competitors because, as Patrick said, this is, running this thing is fairly complex. One thing is doing it, being a niche player where this is essentially what we do. Another thing is, of course, being a general insurance company where this is just a minor thing of your operation and your IT and your priorities. So what we have done in Denmark is that we have approached all our competitors like Tryg, that also works in other countries like Codan, etc., and said, this is the challenge. we have an infrastructure model where we can do this. We foresee that you will have a major cost in implementing the same things in your systems. So why don't we talk together and cooperate instead of competing in this world? And there we have had other companies that are willing to listen, and we are in a dialogue, but it have not been concrete yet as to the next steps. It is of course a long process, but we believe that there will be a consolidation because the expat market and the travel market is not big enough for a number of players having to invest in both the lawyers to work on the compliance information and the infrastructure to be able to manage it afterwards in fairly small countries like Denmark and Sweden. That is our view, at least. Yep.
Thanks, Dan. Super. Yeah. More questions maybe from your side? Must be an easy topic. Or you're totally confused. There are two options. Either it's easy or it's too difficult. Anyway. Okay, here we go.
This is actually not a question, it's more of a comment since we have the Swedish market in place here. Hassan Ment from Marsh here. I would like to address the tax leg of the presentation because it's a subject that all the speakers have touched upon. And I think that, for instance, when with the example of where non-admitted is permitted, such as the example with India, I think it's very important both for the insurers but also for the brokers to inform the customers of the practical implications of such a cover. Because, for instance, in the example of India, where the claim payment was of $20 million, what happens to the money when it's wired to the Indian subsidiary, and how much money is it left? Because I think that sometimes in the discussions or when you set up international programs, you don't really go through the practical implications. Because in this, like what happens to the money that are wired, because they are still subjected to income taxes, because for the Indian regulators, there hasn't been a claim incurred because the claim was paid to a foreign entity in a foreign country. So the wirement is, viewed upon as strictly as an income. So they enforce income tax on it, and I think that that's a subject that we need to address more often and look at more acutely, because there's also the issue of double taxation. Because say, for instance, that the mother company is in Finland. So if you make the payment on a financial interest clause, for instance, where you make the payment to Finland, so the payment will be subject to Finnish income tax, and then they have to wire the money to the subsidiary in India, where the income tax is, I think it's 50%, but I might be wrong on that subject. So it just, there's less and less amount of the claim that ends up with where the claim is occurred. So I think that it's really important that we all do take this into account when we structure international programs for customers, not only looking on the compliance issues, but what are the practical implications for our customers.
Yeah, thanks for your comment. Any more comments or experiences on your side, maybe like to share? Okay. Well, then we leave it there for now. Maybe we should briefly close with just very shortly what we want to do. What we would like to do is to provide you with the material of today, because there was a lot of information, we know that, and some of that is not easy to digest. So we will send that out. We will also make a small cutting of the day in a kind of a video format. As far as I have learned, it's like something like 3-4 minutes max. So nothing you couldn't shoulder. Don't worry, you don't get 3 hours to watch. Very short, very to the point, but maybe also something you can then, as it is short, share with customers or with colleagues in the organization. So let's hope we can make a good job there, and that you can use that. And we would also, of course, like to continue this dialogue. Not, of course, in the next month. I think that's a bit too much of a short sequence. But we believe, as we said, that this is a market topic. This is nothing just for us in ERV. This is for all of us very relevant. You mentioned that as well. And I think we can only all profit from that. So we would like to install some kind of format in the next months to come that we on a regular basis can be in the dialogue. And we would be more than happy if we would see some of you again. And if you would even spread the news further to others. I think that's just the purpose, as also Dan said. In Denmark, we're doing the same thing. And I like to close with the thought that we are open for discussions, for strategic partnerships. I'm a little bit wondering how Swedish insurance companies, for instance, really like to settle this problem on their own, because you will have problems in leveraging the effort. Because whom else would you like to offer it? You see, the nice thing about our specialty group, as small as it is that whatever solution we have in place in the US, we can immediately use in Czechia, in Spain, in the UK, in Germany, in Denmark, you name it. So whatever we invest on, we can use for the whole group. And that might be a difference to some of the local players that are represented here or that you have contacts to. So I think markets are changing and strategic options are also changing, and that's what the fun is about business, is about the options you have. And I think that's also a new option, and I think as specialty and as the market leader in Sweden in this specialty field, we're up, so to say, up for discussions on this as much as we are in Denmark at the moment, and the response we see in Denmark is quite encouraging. So if that is something you'd like to discuss with us, we're ready for that. Else, I would like to thank you for coming, for the patience, for, so to say, the good nerves for these topics. I like to thank the speakers for being with us, Axco, Carol, Ali, and of course also to Hartmut and to Andreas. Håkan, I think, has left us already. I can't see him at the moment, but Elfie is here around. Thanks for you as well. Thanks for coming. And thanks for the team to put it together, namely Mia and Christina, and all of us in ERV Sweden, of course, as well, in the sales team and in the interdisciplinary compliance team. Good that you've been here. Have a good rest of the day, and vi ses.